Are you still upset with me? 5 words. That's all it took to shatter 4 years of carefully constructed distance. Nathan Brooks stood frozen outside the glass-walled conference room, his reflection staring back at him like a ghost. Inside, Claire Whitfield waited, the CEO whose brother died on Nathan's watch. The brother whose death Nathan approved with a single signature on a schedule sheet. The guilt had been eating him alive, turning every hallway into an escape route, every meeting into tactical avoidance. But tonight, there was nowhere left to run. If you want to know how a single decision can haunt a man for years, and how facing the truth can finally set him free, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the downtown office building buzzed with that particular frequency that spoke of emptiness. The kind of silence that only came after everyone else had gone home to their families, their Friday night plans, their lives that didn't require them to hide in supply closets to avoid their own CEO. Nathan Brooks had become an expert at disappearing. At 42, he'd mastered the art of strategic absence. He knew which stairwells the executive team never used, which conference rooms had blind spots from the main hallway, and exactly how long he could delay responding to an email before it became professionally unacceptable. For 8 months, he'd been a ghost in his own workplace, present enough to do his job brilliantly, invisible enough to avoid her, Claire Whitfield. The name alone made his chest tighten. Nathan stood in the operations department's break room, ostensibly refilling his coffee mug for the 3rd time in an hour, though the bitter liquid had long since gone cold. Through the interior window, he could see the maze of cubicles stretching out in neat, orderly rows, a grid of productivity and efficiency that he'd helped design. Senior Operations Manager. The title looked impressive on his business cards, sounded authoritative in meetings, and meant absolutely nothing when measured against the weight of a single death. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Dad, Mr. Harrison called about the field trip permission slip again. When are you coming home? Emma." 13 years old, too smart for her own good, and the only reason Nathan got up every morning. He typed back quickly. "Sorry, sweetheart, running late. Pizza okay for dinner?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. "Again? You promised we'd cook together on Fridays." The guilt, different from his work guilt, but no less sharp, twisted in his stomach. He'd made a lot of promises after Lucas Whitfield died. Promises to Emma, mostly. Promises about being present, about not letting work consume him, about never becoming the kind of father who missed his daughter's childhood because he was too busy managing operational efficiencies and quarterly targets. He was failing at those promises too. "Nathan." The voice came from behind him, soft, professional, and utterly inescapable. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, every muscle in his body tensing. In his mind, he'd already cataloged 17 different exit strategies from this break room. None of them would work now. Slowly, Nathan turned around. Claire Whitfield stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor's harsh lighting. At 36, she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that came from hard-won credibility rather than inherited privilege. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she'd loosened her blazer, small concessions to the late hour that somehow made her seem more formidable, not less. She looked nothing like her brother. Lucas had been broader, louder, always filling a room with easy laughter and passionate debates about engineering solutions. But her eyes, those were identical. The same deep brown, the same intensity, the same way of looking at you like she could see through all your carefully constructed defenses. "Ms. Whitfield." Nathan's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I was just avoiding me." She said it matter-of-factly, without accusation. "Again." The coffee mug felt suddenly heavy in his hand. "I have reports to finish before—" "Nathan." She stepped into the break room, letting the door swing closed behind her. "We both know you finished those reports hours ago. You're one of the most efficient managers in this company. You don't stay late because you have to. You stay late because you're waiting for me to leave first." The accuracy of the observation hit him like a physical blow. Nathan set down his mug carefully, buying time, trying to organize thoughts that had been deliberately scattered for months. "I have a lot of work," he said weakly. "You've canceled 7 one-on-one meetings with me in the last 8 months. Claire's voice remained calm, but something underneath it, something that might have been hurt, made Nathan's chest constrict. You've delegated every project that might require direct contact. You take the stairs when you see me near the elevator. You leave team lunches early. You literally turned around and walked the opposite direction in the parking garage last Tuesday. Nathan felt heat creep up his neck. He thought he'd been subtle about that one. I need to get home to my daughter, he said, reaching for his jacket from the back of the break room chair. Then let me walk you out. But Claire moved to block his path, not aggressively, but definitively. Or we can have this conversation right here. Your choice, Nathan. But we're having it tonight. For 8 months, Nathan had been running. From meetings, from eye contact, from the crushing weight of responsibility that sat on his shoulders like a physical burden. He'd been running because every time he saw Claire Whitfield's face, he saw the hospital corridor 4 years ago, saw himself signing papers and making phone calls and watching a young engineer's mother collapse in grief. He'd been running because looking at Claire meant confronting the question that kept him awake at night. How do you apologize for killing someone's brother? I don't. Nathan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. I don't think this is appropriate workplace. Are you still upset with me? The question stopped him cold. Nathan stared at her, genuine confusion cutting through his panic. What? Are you still upset with me? Claire repeated, her expression unreadable. Is that why you've been avoiding me? Because you're angry about something I did? I'm not. Nathan shook his head, the absurdity of the question breaking through his defenses. No, I'm not upset with you. Why would you think? Because you won't look at me. For the first time, Claire's composure cracked slightly. You won't meet with me. You won't even stay in the same room with me for more than 5 minutes. And I've been trying to figure out what I did wrong, what decision I made in my first months as CEO that made you hate me this much. I don't hate you. The words came out too quickly, too raw. Then what? Claire took a step closer. What is it, Nathan? Because I need to know. You're one of the most valuable managers in this company. You have institutional knowledge that's irreplaceable. Your team respects you, your projects succeed, and your operational insights have saved us millions. But I can't work with the senior manager who runs away every time I enter a room. Nathan's hands clenched at his sides. The break room suddenly felt suffocatingly small, the walls pressing in. His phone buzzed again, probably Emma wondering when he'd be home, but he couldn't look away from Claire's eyes. Those eyes that were so much like her brother's. It's not you, he managed finally. It's me. It's... He stopped, the words jamming in his throat. It's what? Claire's voice softened. Nathan, talk to me, please. 4 years. 4 years of carrying this weight, of avoiding mirrors and anniversary dates and anything that reminded him of that night. 4 years of promising Emma he'd be better, be more present, never let work destroy them the way it destroyed other families. 4 years of seeing Lucas Whitfield's face every time he approved an overtime shift or extended a deadline. I knew your brother, Nathan said quietly. Claire went very still. The air in the break room seemed to crystallize, every molecule suspended in the space between them. I know you did, she said carefully. You were the operations manager when he worked here. I was more than that. Nathan's voice was hollow. I was the one who approved the schedule that killed him. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire's expression didn't change. Not exactly. But something shifted behind her eyes, a recognition that made Nathan's stomach drop. She already knew. Of course she knew. She was the CEO. She'd probably read every file, every report, every incident analysis from that night. The conference room, Claire said finally, gesturing toward the glass-walled space visible through the break room's interior window. Now, we're not having this conversation in a break room. I need to go home. Nathan, Claire's voice carried the unmistakable weight of executive authority. Conference room, now. He could refuse, could walk out, get in his car, drive home to Emma and the pizza and the comfortable numbness of avoidance. Could keep running for another 8 months, another 8 years, however long it took for Claire Whitfield to give up or transfer or fire him. But Nathan was tired, bone tired, soul tired, tired of running and hiding and carrying this alone. Okay, he whispered. What? The conference room felt cavernous despite its modest size. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city skyline, where Friday night lights were just beginning to sparkle in the gathering darkness. Nathan had been in this room hundreds of times, budget meetings, project reviews, strategic planning sessions, but tonight it felt like a courtroom. Claire closed the door behind them and gestured to the chairs around the long table. Nathan sat, mostly because his legs suddenly felt unsteady. She took the seat across from him, not at the head of the table where her position would suggest, but directly opposite, as if this were a conversation between equals rather than CEO and employee. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Nathan's phone buzzed again. He pulled it out, saw Emma's latest message. Dad, seriously, when are you coming home? I'm getting worried. He typed back, Soon, sweetheart, I promise. Order the pizza without me. Large pepperoni, extra cheese. When he looked up, Claire was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Your daughter? She asked. Emma. She's 13. Nathan pocketed the phone. She worries when I'm late. You mentioned her in your resignation letter. Nathan's head snapped up. You read that? I read everything. Claire folded her hands on the table. Every file related to my brother's death. Every report, every email, every witness statement, including the resignation letter you submitted 4 years ago that the board refused to accept. Nathan's mouth went dry. That letter had been written at 3 a.m, 2 days after Lucas's funeral, when the grief and guilt had been so overwhelming he couldn't see straight. He'd blamed himself for everything, cataloged every decision that led to that night, and offered his resignation as the only meaningful act of accountability he could provide. The board had rejected it. They'd commissioned an investigation, found no criminal negligence, noted the warnings Nathan had sent about schedule safety, and quietly restructured the operations department to prevent similar situations. They'd given him a month of leave, suggested counseling, and welcomed him back with assurances that the company valued his expertise. None of it had helped with the guilt. Why? Nathan asked. Why read all of it? Because Lucas was my brother. Claire's voice remained steady, but Nathan caught the slight tremor underneath. And because I needed to understand what happened to him. Not the sanitized version HR told me, not the official incident report. The truth. The truth is that I killed him. The words came out flat, emotionless, because Nathan had said them so many times in his head they'd lost all weight. I approved an overnight schedule that was unsafe. I let him work a shift when he was already exhausted. I sent him home in a condition where he couldn't stay awake behind the wheel. Those are the facts. Those are some facts, Claire leaned forward, but not all of them. What else matters? Nathan's voice rose slightly. Your brother died because of a decision I made. That's the only fact that counts. Then why did you fight so hard to prevent it? Nathan blinked. What? Claire pulled out her phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned it to show him an email. Nathan recognized his own writing immediately, a message sent 6 weeks before Lucas's death, addressed to 3 different executives and copied to the safety compliance team. The current overtime policy is unsustainable and dangerous. We've had 14 incidents of extreme fatigue in the operations department this quarter alone. I'm formally recommending we implement the following changes. Mandatory rest periods between shifts, overtime approval requiring manager and safety officer sign-off, and automated alerts when any employee exceeds 45 hours in a week. We will have a serious accident if we don't address this now. Nathan stared at the screen, memories flooding back. He'd written dozens of emails like that one, had fought in countless meetings for better safety protocols, had pushed back against executives who prioritized deadlines over employee well-being. He'd lost most of those fights. You sent 47 emails about schedule safety in the year before Lucas died, Claire said quietly. 47. You filed 6 formal complaints. You threatened to resign twice if they didn't implement better policies. You were the only manager in the company fighting for those changes. It wasn't enough. Nathan's voice cracked. I fought, but I still approved the schedule. I still let him work that shift. Because they would have found someone else if you didn't. Claire set down her phone. I read the incident report, Nathan. I know what happened that night. The client emergency, the impossible deadline, the executive team overruling your safety concerns. You went on record saying the overnight shift was dangerous. You recommended against it, and when they overrode you, you volunteered to work it yourself. Nathan closed his eyes, the memory sharp as broken glass. He had volunteered, had been willing to work the overnight shift himself, to take the risk onto his own shoulders rather than ask one of his team members to do it. But Lucas had stepped up first. "It should have been me," Nathan whispered. "I was going to do it. But Lucas," his voice broke. "He said he'd cover it. Said I had a daughter at home who needed me. He volunteered before I could even—" "I know." Claire's voice was soft. "I read your statement. You tried to refuse his offer. You argued with him for 20 minutes about who should take the shift. He pulled rank on you, said as the senior engineer it was his call to make." Nathan opened his eyes, finding Claire watching him with an expression that looked like understanding. "He was like that," she continued, "always putting others first, always taking on the hardest challenges himself." A sad smile crossed her face. "It was one of the things I loved most about him, and one of the things that terrified me." "He was a good man," Nathan said, the words inadequate but true. "He was." Claire's smile faded. "And he died making a choice to protect you. Not because you forced him, not because you were negligent, but because he chose to work that shift to spare you from it. That doesn't make it better." Nathan's hands clenched on the table. "It makes it worse. He protected me, and You've been punishing yourself ever since." Claire's interruption was gentle but firm. "Nathan, I've watched you for 8 months. You're the first one in the office every morning and the last to leave. You never take vacation days. You approve every safety measure, every schedule change, every overtime request personally. You've restructured the entire operations workflow to make sure no one ever works the kind of hours Lucas worked." "Because I have to," Nathan said desperately. "Because I can't let it happen again. I can't—" He stopped, fighting for control. "I have a daughter, Claire. Emma was 9 years old when Lucas died. If something had happened to me instead, she would have been left alone. Her mother passed away when she was 6. I'm all she has." Understanding flickered across Claire's face. "So you stayed in the job to make sure no other child loses their parent the way Emma almost lost you?" "Yes." The admission felt like releasing a pressure valve. "I stayed because someone needed to fight for the safety protocols. Someone needed to make sure the executives couldn't override basic human decency in favor of deadlines. If I'd quit, they would have just hired someone else who didn't care as much, and another Lucas would have died." "You're probably right," Claire said, "which is why I'm glad you stayed." Nathan's head jerked up. "What?" "The safety changes you implemented over the last 4 years have been remarkable." Claire pulled up something else on her phone. "Fatigue-related incidents are down 73%. Overtime hours are down 40%, while productivity has increased 12%. Employee retention in operations is the highest in the company. You've built something important here, Nathan, something that honors what happened to my brother by making sure it never happens to anyone else." The words should have felt like absolution. Instead, they felt like knives. "It doesn't bring him back," Nathan said roughly. "No." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "It doesn't." They sat in silence, the city lights glittering beyond the glass walls. Nathan could hear the building's ventilation system humming, could see his own reflection ghosted in the window, a tired man with shadows under his eyes and guilt written into every line of his face. "Why did you avoid me?" Claire asked finally. "If you understood that you weren't solely responsible, if you knew you'd done everything you could to prevent it, why run?" Nathan looked at her directly for the first time since entering the conference room. "Because every time I see your face, I see his. You have his eyes, did you know that? The same way of looking at people like you're trying to understand them from the inside out. And every time I see you, I remember the hospital corridor. I remember calling his family. I remember—" His voice broke completely. He pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting tears that had been building for 4 years. "I remember standing outside the emergency room and thinking about Emma," he continued raggedly. "Thinking about how she'd almost lost me too, how close she came to being orphaned because I was willing to work that shift myself. And then I remember Lucas's mother screaming when they told her he was gone, and Nathan couldn't finish. The grief, the guilt, the crushing weight of responsibility he'd been carrying alone for so long, it all came crashing down at once. He didn't hear Claire stand up, didn't realize she'd moved until she was beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Nathan," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Something I've been carrying too." He looked up at her, vision blurred with unshed tears. "I encouraged him to take that job," Claire said, her own voice thick with emotion. "When Lucas was deciding whether to accept the position here, I told him he should do it, that the opportunity was too good to pass up, that ambitious people had to be willing to sacrifice for their careers." She laughed bitterly. "I was working in consulting at the time, pulling 80-hour weeks and thinking I was so impressive. I told him the overtime was normal, that dedication meant going above and beyond, that anyone who complained about work-life balance wasn't committed enough." Nathan stared at her, seeing his own guilt reflected back. "I pushed him toward this job," Claire continued. "I reinforced every terrible message about workplace culture that made him think volunteering for dangerous shifts was admirable. And when he died, Her voice cracked. "I blame myself for teaching him that work was more important than his own safety." "Claire, so when I took this CEO position 8 months ago," she spoke over him, "I wasn't just taking a job. I was trying to fix what I'd broken, trying to understand what happened to my brother and make sure the culture that killed him never hurt anyone else. And when I discovered you, this manager who'd been fighting for safety protocols, who tried to protect Lucas, who'd been living with the same guilt I felt, I didn't know how to talk to you." "You thought I blamed you," Nathan said, understanding dawning. "I thought you saw me as the sister who pushed her brother into a toxic work culture," Claire said. "I thought that's why you were avoiding me. Because every time you looked at me, you saw the person who made Lucas think he had to prove himself by working himself to death." Nathan shook his head slowly. "I never blamed you. I didn't even know you'd encouraged him to take the job. How could I? You weren't responsible for the company's policies, for the executives who prioritize profits over people, for—" "How is that different from what you did?" Claire asked gently. "You're not responsible for the policies either. You fought against them. Just like I eventually learned better and tried to change. We both made mistakes, Nathan, but we're both trying to fix them." The parallel struck Nathan with the force of revelation. He'd been carrying guilt for approving a schedule under pressure from executives who refused to listen to safety concerns. She'd been carrying guilt for encouraging her brother to embrace a work culture she'd since recognized as toxic. They'd both been drowning in the same ocean of responsibility, unable to see that they were equally victims of a system that valued productivity over human life. "I don't know how to let it go," Nathan admitted. "The guilt. Even if I understand intellectually that I did everything I could, even if the investigation cleared me, it's still there. Every morning, every time I approve a schedule or make a decision, I feel him watching, asking why I get to keep living when he doesn't." "I know." Claire's hand was still on his shoulder, a grounding weight. "I feel it too. Every decision I make as CEO, I wonder what Lucas would think. Would he approve? Would he understand what I'm trying to build here? Or would he see me profiting from his death?" "That's not fair?" Claire smiled sadly. "Neither is you blaming yourself for a systemic failure. But that's grief, isn't it? It's not rational. It's not fair. It just is." Nathan drew a shaky breath. "Emma asked me once why I stayed at this job if it made me so sad. She was 11, too young to understand the full story, but old enough to see that I wasn't okay." He looked down at his hands. "I told her I stayed because someone had to make sure other kids didn't lose their parents the way she almost lost me. She asked if that meant Lucas's family mattered more than ours." "What did you tell her?" "That they mattered equally, that every family deserved to have their loved ones come home safely, that making sure of that was the most important thing I could do with my life." Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "But sometimes I wonder if I used that as an excuse. If I stayed not because I was being noble, but because I was too afraid to leave. Too afraid that if I quit, it would mean admitting I couldn't save him, couldn't fix what I'd broken." "You didn't break anything," Claire said firmly. "The system was already broken. You and Lucas, you were both casualties of it. The only difference is that you survived." "Survivor's guilt," Nathan said. "That's what the counselor called it. When the board made me go to therapy after it happened, the counselor said I was experiencing survivor's guilt. that I felt responsible for living when Lucas died. And? And I stopped going after 3 sessions because hearing someone diagnose my feelings didn't make them go away. Nathan rubbed his eyes. I kept working instead, kept fighting for safety changes, kept telling myself that if I could prevent one more accident, one more tragedy, then Lucas's death would mean something. It did mean something, Claire said. Not because of the accident, tragedy doesn't have to have meaning, but because of what you built afterward, the policies you fought for, the lives you've protected. That means something, Nathan. He wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the absolution her words offered, but 4 years of guilt wasn't so easily dissolved. His phone buzzed. Another message from Emma. Dad, it's been 2 hours. Are you okay? Nathan checked the time, startled to discover it was past 9 o'clock. He'd been in this conference room with Claire for over an hour, time disappearing into the weight of their conversation. I need to go home, he said, standing up. Emma's waiting, and I've already broken enough promises to her this week. Okay. Claire stepped back, giving him space. But Nathan, this conversation isn't over. We need to talk more. About Lucas, about the company, about where we go from here. I know. Nathan grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I'm sorry I avoided you for 8 months. I'm sorry I made you think you'd done something wrong when you were just trying to... He stopped, searching for words. When you were trying to heal too. We both were, Claire said. We just didn't know we were doing it together. Nathan nodded, too emotionally exhausted to formulate a better response. He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Claire? Yes? Do you ever talk to him? The question came out before Nathan could stop it. I mean, I know it's not... I don't mean literally, but do you ever talk to Lucas? About decisions? About what you're doing? Claire was quiet for a moment. Every day, she said finally. Every single day. Sometimes I imagine what he'd say about the changes I'm making. Sometimes I just tell him I'm sorry. Sometimes I ask him if he's proud of me. She met Nathan's eyes. Is that crazy? No. Nathan's throat tightened. I do the same thing, usually in the car, driving home. I tell him about the safety metrics, about the policies that worked, about Emma, sometimes, about how I'm trying to be the kind of father who doesn't let work destroy his family. He paused. I tell him I'm sorry I couldn't save him. What do you think he'd say back? Claire asked softly. Nathan considered the question, really considered it, remembering Lucas's easy laugh and generous spirit. He'd probably tell me to stop being so dramatic. Tell me to go home to my daughter and stop beating myself up over things I can't change. He'd tell me the same thing, Claire said with a small smile. He'd say I'm overthinking it, that I need to trust myself more, and that being CEO is just another challenge to solve. No different than the engineering problems he loved. They stood there, two people united by grief and guilt and a shared connection to someone who wasn't there anymore. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was no longer quite so painful. Monday, Nathan said. We can talk more on Monday about all of this. Monday, Claire agreed. And Nathan, thank you for staying, for fighting, for caring enough about safety that you made yourself sick with guilt, trying to prevent what happened to Lucas from happening to anyone else. Nathan didn't trust himself to respond. He just nodded and left, walking through the empty office building with something loosening in his chest that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't forgiveness, but maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward both. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and Friday night traffic. Nathan's hands gripped the steering wheel, his mind replaying the conversation with Claire in fragments. Her voice saying, "You didn't break anything." Her admission that she'd encouraged Lucas to take the job. Her understanding that they'd both been carrying the same crushing weight. When he pulled into the driveway of his modest 2-story house in the suburbs, Nathan sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the light glowing from Emma's bedroom window on the 2nd floor. She was still awake, probably reading or scrolling through her phone, waiting for him to come home. Just like she waited every night. Just like she'd been waiting for 4 years while he tried to atone for a death that maybe, wasn't entirely his fault. Nathan grabbed his briefcase and headed inside. The smell of pizza greeted him immediately. Emma had ordered the large pepperoni like he suggested, though most of it was still in the box on the kitchen counter. "Dad?" Emma's voice called from upstairs. "Finally!" She appeared at the top of the stairs a moment later, wearing her favorite oversized sweatshirt and fuzzy socks, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. At 13, she was caught in that strange space between childhood and adolescence, still young enough to need her father, old enough to see through his excuses. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Nathan said, setting down his briefcase. "Work ran late." "Work always runs late." Emma came down the stairs, her expression somewhere between worried and annoyed. "You said we'd cook together tonight. You promised." "I know. I'm sorry." "You say that a lot." She crossed her arms, studying him with eyes too perceptive for her age. "Are you okay? You look like you've been crying." Nathan touched his face self-consciously. His eyes probably were red from the tears he'd fought in the conference room. "I'm fine. Just a long day." "Dad," Emma's voice carried that particular tone that meant she wasn't buying it. "You've had a long day every day for forever. What's really going on?" He looked at his daughter, this brilliant, compassionate girl who'd already survived losing one parent and lived in constant fear of losing another. How much could he tell her? How much should she know about the guilt and grief that had been shaping their lives for years? "Come sit," Nathan said, gesturing to the couch in the living room. "Let's talk." Emma followed him, curling up on one end of the couch, while Nathan took the other. For a moment, neither spoke. "Remember when you asked me why I stayed at my job even though it made me sad?" Nathan began carefully. Emma nodded. "You said it was to protect other families." "Right. Well, tonight I had a conversation with someone at work about why I've been so focused on that. About what happened 4 years ago that made me change." "The accident," Emma said quietly. "The engineer who died." Nathan's head snapped up. "How do you know about that?" "Dad, I'm not stupid." Emma rolled her eyes. "You think I didn't notice when you came home that night looking like your whole world had ended? When you stopped sleeping and started working crazy hours? When you changed basically everything about your job?" She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I didn't know all the details until I was older, but I Googled it eventually. Lucas Whitfield, age 34, died in a car accident after working an overnight shift at your company." Nathan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "Emma, I know you blame yourself," she continued, her voice small. "I know you think it was your fault because you were his manager or something. But Dad, you were trying to come home that night. You've told me 100 times that the only reason you weren't working that shift is because he volunteered instead." Her eyes met his, shimmering with tears. "I know I have Lucas Whitfield to thank for still having a father." The words hit Nathan like a freight train. All these years he'd thought he was protecting Emma by not talking about it, by keeping his guilt private, by working himself to exhaustion to prevent another tragedy. But she'd known. She'd understood. And she'd been carrying her own complicated feelings about it. Gratitude for having her father, guilt for being grateful that someone else's brother died instead. "Oh, sweetheart." Nathan moved to sit beside her, pulling her into a hug. "You shouldn't have to think about things like that." "But I do," Emma said against his shoulder. "Because you do. Because I see how it affects you every day, and I don't know how to help." Nathan held his daughter, feeling the weight of his choices settling differently now. He thought he was being noble, protecting her, showing her the importance of responsibility and safety, but what he'd actually been doing was teaching her that guilt was more important than presence, that making up for the past mattered more than being in the present. "The person I talked to tonight," Nathan said slowly, "is Lucas's sister. She's the new CEO of the company." Emma pulled back to look at him. "Seriously? That's who you've been avoiding? You noticed that too?" "Dad, you're not subtle." Emma wiped her eyes. "Every time you mention the CEO, you get this weird look and change the subject. I figured something was up." Nathan laughed despite himself, a short, surprised sound. "Apparently I'm not as good at hiding things as I thought." "So what happened tonight?" Emma asked. "Why did you finally talk to her?" "She cornered me." Nathan smiled slightly, asked if I was still upset with her. I thought she knew I blamed myself, but it turned out she thought I blamed her for encouraging her brother to take the job in the first place. Did she? Encourage him? Yeah. But so did the whole culture of the company. The expectations about work, the way we all bought into the idea that putting in crazy hours was somehow admirable. Nathan sighed. She's been carrying her own guilt about it, just like I have. What did you tell her? The truth. That I'd approved the schedule that killed him. That I'd tried to take the overnight shift myself and Lucas volunteered instead. That I've been living with that for 4 years. Nathan paused. And she told me about all the emails I'd sent fighting for safety changes, about how I'd done everything I could to prevent exactly what happened, about how I'd built something good in the aftermath. Did it help? Emma asked, talking to her. Nathan considered the question. I don't know yet. It was hard, painful, but also maybe necessary, like lancing a wound that's been infected for too long. Emma was quiet for a moment, then, Dad, can I tell you something? Of course. I'm really proud of you for making workplaces safer, for fighting to protect people, but she hesitated. Sometimes I wish you'd protect yourself too, protect us, our family. The words were a gentle knife, precise and devastating. I know I've been absent, Nathan said quietly. I know I've prioritized work over spending time with you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but you were doing a right thing, Emma interrupted. But maybe not the only right thing. Dad, you don't have to save everyone to make up for not being able to save Lucas Whitfield. You're already a good person. You're already a good dad. You need to believe that. Nathan pulled his daughter close again, overwhelmed by her wisdom and compassion. When had she grown up so much? When had she become someone who could see his wounds so clearly and still love him anyway? Thank you, he whispered. For understanding, for being patient with me even when I didn't deserve it. You always deserve it, Emma said. You're my dad. That's kind of the whole point. They sat together on the couch as the pizza grew cold in the kitchen and the night deepened outside. Nathan thought about Claire Whitfield waiting in the empty office building, about Lucas's face and his memories, about all the ways grief could reshape a life. He thought about Monday, when he'd have to walk into that building and face Claire again, not as the man running from his guilt, but as someone trying to find a path forward. He thought about Emma, who'd been watching him destroy himself with blame and had somehow still grown into this remarkable person despite it all. And for the first time in 4 years, Nathan Brooks let himself imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor the dead without sacrificing the living. That maybe healing didn't mean forgetting. That maybe forgiveness could coexist with responsibility. That maybe he deserved a second chance. The weekend passed in a blur of mundane activities that felt anything but mundane. Nathan made pancakes with Emma on Saturday morning, actually made them, standing at the stove flipping batter while she mixed chocolate chips into the bowl, both of them laughing when he burned the first batch. They went to the farmer's market afterward, wandering through stalls of fresh produce and homemade crafts, and for the first time in months, Nathan didn't check his work email even once. Sunday brought a rainstorm that kept them inside, and they spent the afternoon watching movies curled up on the couch with blankets and popcorn. Emma chose a comedy that had them both cracking up, and Nathan realized with a jolt that he couldn't remember the last time he'd heard himself laugh like that, unguarded, genuine, free from the weight that usually pressed on his chest. But underneath the normalcy, his conversation with Claire kept replaying in his mind. Her words circled like birds that wouldn't land. You didn't break anything. The system was already broken. And his own admission, spoken aloud for the first time. I approved the schedule that killed him. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Nathan stood in front of his closet at 6:30, staring at his work clothes with an unfamiliar knot of anxiety in his stomach. For 8 months, he'd gone to the office with a single purpose: avoid Claire Whitfield at all costs. Now he was supposed to walk in and, what? Have another emotional confrontation? Pretend Friday night hadn't happened? He had no roadmap for this. Dad, you're going to be late, Emma called from downstairs. He grabbed a navy suit and white shirt, dressed mechanically, and headed down to find Emma already at the kitchen table with her cereal and homework spread out around her. Big day? She asked, not looking up from her math worksheet. Something like that. Are you going to talk to her again? Lucas's sister? Nathan poured himself coffee, buying time. Probably. She said we needed to continue the conversation. Emma set down her pencil and looked at him directly. Are you scared? The question was so straightforward, so perfectly aimed at the heart of what he was feeling, that Nathan almost laughed. Yes, sweetheart. I am. Why? Because Nathan leaned against the counter, considering how much truth a 13-year-old could handle. Because talking about what happened means really facing it. Not just carrying the guilt quietly, but actually examining it. Looking at all the choices I made, all the things I could have done differently. That's terrifying. But you said she doesn't blame you, Emma pointed out. And you said she's been feeling guilty too, so maybe talking about it won't be as scary as you think. When did you get so wise? Emma grinned. I have a really good dad who taught me to think things through. Nathan crossed the room and kissed the top of her head. I love you. You know that, right? I know, Dad. Now go to work before you're late and give yourself another reason to stress out. The morning commute felt longer than usual. Nathan's hands gripped the steering wheel as he navigated familiar streets, his mind churning through possible scenarios. Would Claire want to meet first thing? Would she give him space to settle in? Would their conversation from Friday hang between them like an elephant in every room? He pulled into the company parking garage at 7:45, 15 minutes earlier than his usual arrival time. The elevator ride to the 5th floor felt like ascending to a battlefield. The operations department was already buzzing with Monday morning energy, people grabbing coffee, discussing weekend plans, settling into their cubicles with the resigned efficiency of another work week beginning. Nathan nodded to a few colleagues as he made his way to his office, a modest space with windows overlooking the city and walls covered in project timelines and safety metrics charts. He'd barely set down his briefcase when his desk phone rang. Nathan stared at it for 2 rings before answering. Brooks? Nathan, it's Claire. Do you have a minute? Her voice was professional, neutral, giving nothing away. Nathan's stomach tightened. Of course. Can you come up to my office? There's something I need to show you. The line went dead before he could respond. Nathan stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed his coffee and headed for the elevator. The executive floor was on the 8th level, a space he'd visited countless times for meetings and presentations, but always with a sense of entering foreign territory. Today, that feeling was amplified 100-fold. Claire's executive assistant, a young woman named Michelle, looked up as he approached. Mr. Brooks, she's expecting you. Go right in. Nathan knocked once and pushed open the heavy oak door. Claire's office was spacious but surprisingly understated. No ostentatious displays of power, just a clean desk, comfortable chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with morning light. Claire herself stood by the window, her back to the door, looking out over the city skyline. Close the door, she said without turning around. Nathan did, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Claire turned to face him, and Nathan was struck by how tired she looked. The professional polish from Friday night was still there, but underneath it he could see shadows under her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders that spoke of a sleepless weekend. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing to the chairs arranged around a small conference table in the corner. I know it's early. It's fine, Nathan sat, setting his coffee cup down carefully. You said you wanted to show me something? I did. But first, I need to apologize. Claire remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. Friday night, I ambushed you. I knew you'd been avoiding me, and instead of giving you space or approaching the situation more diplomatically, I cornered you and forced a conversation you weren't ready for. That was wrong of me. Claire, please, let me finish. She held up a hand. You've been carrying enormous guilt for 4 years. Guilt I didn't fully understand until Friday night. And I made you relive that trauma in a break room and a conference room after hours when you just wanted to go home to your daughter. That wasn't fair. Nathan shook his head slowly. You didn't force anything I wasn't already thinking about every single day. And honestly, I needed someone to corner me. I would have kept avoiding the conversation forever if you hadn't. Maybe. Claire finally sat down across from him. But I also need you to know that I didn't read those files about Lucas's death to use them against you. I read them because I needed to understand what happened to my brother. Finding out that you'd been fighting for safety changes, that you'd warned the executives, that you tried to work that shift yourself. That wasn't ammunition. That was revelation. What do you mean? Claire pulled a folder from the table and opened it, revealing a stack of papers Nathan recognized immediately. His emails, his safety proposals, his formal complaints, all printed out and organized chronologically. For 8 months, I've been trying to figure out who you were, Claire said quietly. The operations manager who was there when my brother died. I read the official reports, and they painted you as competent, but ultimately the person who signed off on the schedule. Then I read deeper, and I found all of this. She gestured to the papers. 47 emails fighting for better policies, 6 formal complaints, 2 resignation threats, a man who clearly cared deeply about his team's well-being and was being systematically ignored by people who should have listened. They didn't want to hear it, Nathan said, the old frustration bleeding through. The executive team at the time was focused on growth, on meeting aggressive client demands, on proving the company could compete with the bigger players. Safety protocols were seen as obstacles to efficiency. I know. I read their responses to your emails. Claire's expression hardened. Dismissive, condescending, and in some cases actively hostile. One of them literally wrote, "We don't need hand-holding from operations about theoretical risks." Nathan remembered that email. It had arrived 2 weeks before Lucas died, in response to his warning about fatigue-related incidents. He'd been furious, had drafted a scathing response, and then deleted it because fighting with executives who refused to listen felt like shouting into the void. That executive doesn't work here anymore, Claire said, as if reading his thoughts. Neither do 2 of the others who overrode your safety concerns. I didn't fire them because of what happened to Lucas. That would have been legally complicated. But I did make it very clear that their approach to employee well-being was incompatible with the company I'm trying to build. Nathan looked at her with new understanding. You've been cleaning house. Restructuring, Claire corrected. Removing people who prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. People who see employees as resources to be exploited rather than human beings with lives outside these walls. She paused. People who created the conditions that killed my brother. The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. When I took this job, Claire continued, her voice softening, I told myself it was about honoring Lucas's legacy, about making sure his death meant something. But the truth is, I was angry, furious at the company that worked him to death, at the executives who valued deadlines over safety, at a system that treated people like Lucas as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit. She looked directly at Nathan. And I think part of me wanted to find someone to blame, someone I could point to and say, this is the person responsible. Nathan's chest tightened. Did you? Find someone to blame? No. Claire's answer was immediate and firm. Because the more I learned, the more I realized there was no single villain in this story. Just a broken system and people trying to survive within it, including you. She reached across the table and pulled out a specific document from the folder. Nathan's resignation letter, 4 years old, the words still sharp with grief and guilt. This letter, Claire said, holding it up, is one of the most devastating things I've ever read. You took full responsibility for Lucas's death. You cataloged every decision you made, every point where you think you could have intervened differently, every moment of doubt you experienced. You offered your resignation as the only meaningful accountability you could provide. She set the letter down gently. Nathan, this reads like a confession from someone who believes they committed murder. That's how it felt, Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, and I understand why you felt that way. But Nathan, this letter also shows me a man who cared so deeply about what happened, who took responsibility so seriously that he was willing to sacrifice his career to make amends. That's not the response of someone who was negligent or indifferent. That's the response of someone who genuinely gave a damn. Nathan stared at the letter, at his own handwriting from 4 years ago, shaky in places. The ink smudged where tears had fallen. He'd written it at 3 a.m, Emma asleep upstairs, the house silent except for the scratch of pen on paper and his own ragged breathing. The board rejected it, he said unnecessarily. They both knew the outcome. Because they knew you weren't responsible, Claire said. Because the investigation found no criminal negligence, no policy violations, no evidence that you'd done anything wrong beyond being trapped in an impossible situation created by people above your pay grade. That doesn't change the fact that I signed the schedule. No, it doesn't. Claire's honesty was somehow comforting in its directness. You did sign it, and Lucas did die. Those are facts, and I'm not going to minimize them or pretend they don't matter. But Nathan, you signed that schedule under duress, after fighting against it, after volunteering to work the shift yourself, after exhausting every option to prevent exactly what happened. It still wasn't enough. Nothing would have been enough. Claire leaned forward, her intensity almost physical. That's what I've come to understand after 8 months of running this company and seeing how deeply the problems ran. The culture was toxic. The expectations were unsustainable. The pressure from the top was relentless. Even if you'd refused to sign that schedule, they would have found someone else who would. Even if you'd quit and protest, Lucas would have worked that shift anyway because someone had to, and he was the kind of person who stepped up when others needed him. Nathan closed his eyes, the truth of her words cutting through his defenses. He'd thought about this scenario countless times. What if he'd refused? What if he'd quit? What if he'd physically prevented Lucas from taking the shift, and every variation ended the same way? The work would have needed to be done. Someone would have been sacrificed to the deadline. The system would have continued grinding people down because no single person's refusal could stop it. I stayed to change the system, Nathan said, opening his eyes. That's what I told myself. That if I stayed, I could implement the safety protocols they'd refused before. That I could prevent it from happening again. And you did. Claire pulled out another document, this one new, printed recently. These are the current safety metrics for the operations department. Fatigue-related incidents down 73%. Overtime hours reduced by 40%, while productivity increased 12%. Employee retention at a 5-year high. Workplace satisfaction scores improved across every category. She looked up at him. You built something extraordinary, Nathan. You took the guilt and anger and grief you felt, and you channeled it into creating real, measurable change. That's not nothing. It doesn't bring Lucas back. No, it doesn't. Claire's voice cracked slightly. Nothing brings him back. Not my guilt, not your safety protocols, not firing the executives who ignored your warnings. Lucas is gone, and that's a permanent loss we both have to live with. She paused, collecting herself. But the fact that we can't undo his death doesn't mean we can't honor his life by making sure it never happens to anyone else. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. Not absolution exactly, but a slight easing of the crushing pressure he'd carried for so long. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe he couldn't save Lucas, but he had saved others. The numbers were right there in black and white. Fewer incidents, fewer injuries, fewer people pushed to the breaking point. You said you had something to show me, Nathan said, needing to shift the conversation before the emotion overwhelmed him again. Right. Claire stood and walked to her desk, returning with a leather portfolio. She set it down in front of Nathan and flipped it open. Inside was a proposal, professionally formatted, comprehensive, clearly the result of weeks of work. Nathan scanned the first page and felt his breath catch. The Lucas Whitfield Workplace Safety Initiative, Sam, he read aloud. I've been working on this since I took the CEO position, Claire said, sitting back down. Using your safety protocols as the foundation, but expanding them company-wide. Not just operations, but every department. Engineering, sales, marketing, even the executive team. She flipped through the pages, showing him charts and implementation timelines. Mandatory rest periods between shifts. Overtime requiring dual approval from managers and safety officers. Automated alerts for anyone exceeding safe working hours. Regular wellness checks. Mental health resources. Everything you've been fighting for, formalized and protected by company policy. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. This was more than just his proposals given a fancy name. This was a complete overhaul of corporate culture, a fundamental restructuring of how the company valued its employees. It was everything he'd dreamed of implementing but never had the authority to enforce. The board approved it last week, Claire continued. Full budget, full support, implementation starting next quarter. Every employee will be trained on the new policies. Every manager will be held accountable for compliance. And anyone who tries to override safety concerns the way they did with you will face immediate consequences up to and including termination. Why? Nathan's voice was hoarse. Why name it after Lucas? Because he deserves to be remembered as more than a tragedy statistic. Claire's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Because his death exposed the cracks in a system that was failing everyone, not just him. And because if we're going to honor his memory, it should be by protecting the people who are still here. The engineers, the managers, the employees at every level who deserve to go home safely to their families every single night. Nathan couldn't speak. The words were stuck in his throat, tangled with 4 years of grief and guilt and desperate attempts at redemption. He'd wanted so badly for Lucas's death to mean something, for the sacrifice to result in change, but he'd never imagined it would look like this: comprehensive, institutional, permanent. There's more, Claire said quietly. She pulled out one final document from the portfolio. I want you to lead the implementation. Nathan's head snapped up. What? You're the most qualified person in the company for this role. You understand the operations side. You've been fighting for these changes longer than anyone, and you have the respect of employees at every level. Plus, she hesitated. Plus, you deserve to be part of this. You deserve to see your work recognized and implemented properly. Claire, I can't. Yes, you can. Her voice was firm but gentle. I know what you're going to say. That you're too close to it, that your guilt makes you the wrong choice, that you should step aside and let someone else take credit. But Nathan, that's exactly why you're the right choice, because you care, because you'll fight for these policies the way no one else will, because you understand what's at stake in a way that goes beyond metrics and compliance. Nathan looked down at the proposal, at Lucas's name printed across the top in bold letters, at the comprehensive safety framework that represented years of his own frustrated advocacy finally being heard. He thought about Emma asking him why he stayed at a job that made him sad, and his answer that someone needed to make sure other kids didn't lose their parents. He thought about Claire's revelation that she'd been carrying her own guilt, her own need for redemption through action. If I do this, Nathan said slowly, I need it to be real, not performative. Not just a PR move to say we care about safety. It needs to have teeth, consequences for violations, protection for employees who report concerns, real, measurable accountability. Agreed. Claire didn't hesitate. That's exactly what I want. No compromises, no watering it down to make executives comfortable. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. And if that means pushing back against powerful people who don't like being told they can't work their teams to death, then we push back together. Claire met his gaze steadily. Nathan, I didn't become CEO to maintain the status quo. I became CEO to tear down the culture that killed my brother and build something better in its place. You've been fighting that same fight from a different position. Now we have a chance to fight it together, with actual authority to make change happen. Nathan felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Accepting this role meant more than just implementing safety policies. It meant stepping into a leadership position that would make him highly visible, that would require him to work closely with Claire, that would force him to confront his guilt every single day by putting Lucas's name on documents and presentations and training materials. It also meant honoring the promise he'd made to himself 4 years ago. That Lucas's death would not be in vain, that the system would change, that no other family would suffer the same loss. Okay, Nathan said finally. I'll do it. Claire's entire body seemed to relax, relief washing over her features. Thank you, truly, you. On one condition. What's that? Nathan looked directly at her, letting all his sincerity show. We do this for all the right reasons, not to absolve our guilt or convince ourselves we've made up for what happened. We do it because it's the right thing to do, because people deserve safe workplaces, because no metric or deadline is worth destroying someone's health or family or life. We do it because it matters, not because it makes us feel better. Deal. Claire extended her hand across the table. Nathan shook it, feeling the firm grip of someone who meant what she said. They held the handshake a moment longer than professionally necessary, a silent acknowledgement of everything unsaid, everything they'd both been carrying, everything they were choosing to build together. When Nathan returned to his office an hour later, his head was spinning with implementation plans and budget allocations and training schedules. Claire had walked him through the entire proposal in detail, answering his questions, incorporating his suggestions, treating him as a true partner rather than just an employee following orders. By the end of the meeting, they'd mapped out a 6-month rollout plan that would touch every corner of the company. He sat at his desk and stared at the copy of the proposal Claire had given him, Lucas's name still visible on the cover page. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "How's work? Did you talk to her?" Nathan smiled and typed back. "Talk to her. Big things happening. Tell you more tonight. Good things?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Good things." He set down his phone and opened his laptop, pulling up the safety metrics he'd been tracking for 4 years. The data was all there. Incident reports declining quarter after quarter, overtime hours dropping as he'd implemented tighter controls, employee feedback improving as people felt heard and protected. He'd been building this case for years without even realizing it, collecting evidence that humane workplace policies didn't just protect people. They improved outcomes for everyone. Now he had the chance to prove it on a company-wide scale. The day passed in a blur of meetings and emails. Nathan's team noticed something different about him, a focus, an energy that had been missing despite his technical competence. He caught himself smiling during a conference call about scheduling optimization, actually engaged with the content rather than just going through the motions while his mind wandered to guilt and grief. At 4:30, his desk phone rang again. "Claire." "Sorry to bother you," she said, "but I just got off a call with the board. They want a preliminary presentation on the safety initiative next Monday. Can you put something together?" "Absolutely. What's the focus?" "Implementation timeline, budget justification, and expected outcomes. Nothing fancy, just enough to show we're serious and have a solid plan." "I'll have a draft to you by Thursday," Nathan promised. "Perfect." "And Nathan?" Claire's voice softened. "Thank you again for agreeing to lead this. It means more than you know." "It means a lot to me too," Nathan admitted. After hanging up, he spent another hour outlining the presentation before finally packing up to head home. As he walked through the parking garage toward his car, Nathan realized he wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore, wasn't checking corners to make sure Claire wasn't nearby, wasn't planning escape routes from potential encounters. The knot of anxiety that had lived in his chest for 8 months had loosened, not disappeared, but definitely eased. The drive home felt different too. Instead of rehashing the day's avoided interactions and close calls, Nathan found himself thinking about implementation strategies and training modules, found himself mentally drafting the speech he'd give to department heads about why these policies mattered, found himself, for the first time in years, genuinely excited about his work. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework when he walked in at 5:45, earlier than he'd been home on a weekday in months. "Dad?" She looked up in surprise. "You're home early." "Wanted to beat traffic," Nathan said, setting down his briefcase. "Plus, I think I owe you some actual quality time. Want to make dinner together? For real this time?" Emma's face lit up. "Really? Not pizza?" "Really? How about pasta? We can make sauce from scratch." "You know how to make sauce from scratch?" Nathan laughed. "Your grandmother taught me. I haven't made it in years, but I think I remember." They worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and browning garlic while water boiled for pasta. Emma chattered about school, about her friend drama, about an upcoming science project she was nervous about. Nathan listened, really listened, not just nodding while his mind was elsewhere, and offered advice that was actually helpful instead of distracted platitudes. "So what happened at work?" Emma asked as she stirred the sauce. "You said big things." "The CEO asked me to lead a new company-wide safety initiative," Nathan said, carefully measuring how much to share. "It's based on the protocols I've been implementing in my department, but expanded to everyone. Better work-life balance, protection against excessive overtime, resources for mental health and wellness." "That sounds amazing. Why do you look worried?" Nathan paused in shredding Parmesan. "Because it's named after Lucas Whitfield, the engineer who died. His sister, the CEO, wants to honor his memory by making sure what happened to him never happens to anyone else." Emma set down her spoon and turned to face him fully. "Dad, that's not a reason to look worried. That's incredible. That's exactly what you've been working toward for 4 years." I know, but you feel guilty that his name is on something you're leading, Emma finished perceptively, because you still blame yourself for his death. Nathan sighed. You're too smart for 13. I'm exactly smart enough for 13. Emma crossed her arms in a gesture that reminded Nathan painfully of her mother. Dad, listen to me. You didn't kill Lucas Whitfield. A bad system and bad decisions by people in charge killed him. You tried to stop it, and they wouldn't listen. Now you have a chance to make sure it never happens again, and you're worried about whether you deserve to be the one doing it? When you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous, right? Emma's voice was gentle despite her directness. Because it is. Dad, you're not honoring Lucas's memory by punishing yourself forever. You're honoring it by doing exactly what you're doing, making workplaces safer so other families don't lose someone they love. Nathan pulled his daughter into a hug, overwhelmed by her wisdom and clarity. How did you get so wise? Good genes, Emma said against his shoulder. And a dad who taught me to think about things that matter. They finished making dinner together, and for the first time in recent memory, Nathan didn't check his work email once during the meal. They talked and laughed and cleaned up together, and when Emma went upstairs to finish her homework, Nathan sat on the couch feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but present nonetheless. His phone buzzed with an email from Claire. Just a single line. Thank you for today. Looking forward to building this together. Nathan typed back, me too. 2 words, but they carried the weight of 4 years of grief just beginning, to transform into purpose. He thought about Monday's presentation, about the months of implementation ahead, about working closely with Claire to build something that mattered. He thought about Lucas Whitfield, brilliant and generous, and gone too soon, and for the first time Nathan let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, honoring the dead didn't require destroying himself in the process. That night, for the first time in 4 years, Nathan Brooks slept through until morning without waking once from nightmares of hospital corridors and unanswered phone calls and grief that never ended. The presentation to the board was scheduled for 10 o'clock Monday morning, which gave Nathan exactly 4 days to compile years of data, research, and hard-won experience into something cohesive enough to convince a room full of executives that overhauling their entire workplace culture was worth the investment. He worked late Tuesday night, the office empty except for the janitorial staff, and the occasional ambitious junior analyst burning the midnight oil. Nathan had spreadsheets open across 3 monitors, cross-referencing incident reports with productivity metrics, building the irrefutable case that humane workplace policies didn't just save lives, they saved money. You're still here. Nathan looked up to find Claire standing in his office doorway, her blazer draped over one arm and her hair loose around her shoulders. It was past 9, well beyond normal executive hours. I could say the same about you, Nathan replied, gesturing to the empty hallway behind her. Board prep never ends. Claire stepped inside, her eyes scanning the data covering his screens. How's it coming? Good. I think. The numbers are solid. Operations department has saved the company over $2 million in reduced turnover costs alone since we implemented the initial safety protocols. Scaled company-wide, we're looking at potential savings of $15 to $20 million annually. Claire moved closer, studying the charts. That's the financial argument. What about the human one? Nathan pulled up a different file, this one containing anonymized employee testimonials he'd collected over the past 3 days. Statements from engineers who no longer feared for their health, from managers who felt supported in prioritizing their team's well-being, from employees who'd stayed with the company specifically because of the changes in operations. These, Nathan said quietly, these are the people we're protecting. Claire read through several testimonials in silence, her expression shifting from professional interest to something deeper, more personal. One in particular seemed to catch her attention, a statement from a young engineer who wrote about watching his manager refuse an unsafe overtime request and feeling, for the first time in his career, valued as a human being rather than a resource. Lucas would have written something like this, Claire said, her voice tight, if he'd lived long enough to see these changes. He would have been the first one celebrating safer policies, cheering for managers who prioritized people over deadlines. Nathan didn't know what to say to that. The weight of Lucas's absence suddenly filled the room, as present as if the man himself were standing beside them, looking at the data that might have saved his life. I keep thinking about that night, Claire continued, still staring at the screen. The night he died. I was in Boston, working on a consulting project that seemed so important at the time. Lucas called me around 7 to tell me about the overnight shift. He sounded tired, exhausted really, but also kind of excited. Said it was a challenging technical problem, the kind he loved solving. Nathan's chest tightened. He'd heard this part of the story in the incident reports, but hearing it from Claire made it viscerally real. I told him to crush it, Claire said with a bitter laugh. Those were my exact words. Crush it, little brother. Show them why you're the best. I encouraged him to push through the fatigue, to see it as an opportunity rather than a warning sign. She finally looked away from the screen, meeting Nathan's eyes. I was still operating under the delusion that dedication meant sacrificing everything, including your health and safety, for your career. You didn't know, Nathan said. Neither did you. But we both blame ourselves anyway. Claire moved to sit in the chair across from Nathan's desk. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Nathan nodded, sensing this was important. The night Lucas died, after I got the call from the hospital, I was angry before I was sad. Furious, actually. I remember standing in my hotel room in Boston, staring at my phone, and my first thought wasn't grief, it was rage. At him for being so reckless. At myself for encouraging it. At the company for creating conditions where working yourself to death was seen as admirable. She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. I stayed angry for months. It was easier than accepting that he was gone, easier than facing my own complicity in the culture that killed him. Nathan understood that anger intimately. His own had sustained him through the first year after Lucas's death, fueling his safety crusade and giving him purpose when grief threatened to drown him. When did the anger fade? He asked. It hasn't, not completely. Claire's smile was sad. But it's changed. Instead of being angry at individuals, at you, at Lucas, at myself, I'm angry at the system, at the corporate culture that treats people as expendable, at the executives who value quarterly earnings over human lives, at the societal messaging that glorifies overwork and calls it ambition. She leaned forward. That's why this initiative matters so much to me, Nathan. It's not just about implementing safety policies. It's about dismantling a fundamentally broken system and replacing it with something better. That's a big goal for one company. It has to start somewhere. Why not here? Why not now? Claire's intensity reminded Nathan of her brother, that same passionate conviction that problems existed to be solved. If we can prove that prioritizing employee well-being improves outcomes, other companies will follow. It becomes competitive advantage instead of charitable gesture. Change spreads. Nathan wanted to believe her, wanted to think that one company's policies could ripple outward and transform an entire industry. But he'd been fighting this battle too long to be naive about how resistant systems were to change. The board will push back, he said. Some of them, anyway. They'll argue the costs are too high, the disruption too significant, the risk of competitive disadvantage too great. Let them push back. We have the data. Claire gestured to his monitors. We have the financial case, the human case, and the legal case, because eventually someone's going to sue a company for wrongful death due to unsafe work conditions, and that lawsuit will cost far more than prevention ever would. You've really thought this through. I've thought about nothing else for 8 months. Claire stood, moving to look out Nathan's office window at the city lights below. Do you know why I took this CEO position? It wasn't for the prestige or the salary or the power. It was because the board approached me 6 months after Lucas died and said they wanted fresh leadership that understood the importance of workplace culture. They saw me as Lucas's sister, someone who would honor his memory by running the company better. And you saw it as a chance to fix what broke, Nathan said. Exactly. I saw it as my opportunity to make sure his death wasn't meaningless. To transform the company from the inside and prove that you don't have to sacrifice people to succeed. She turned back to face him. But I can't do it alone, Nathan. I need allies who understand what's at stake. Managers who will enforce the policies even when it's inconvenient. Leaders who will push back against pressure to cut corners or extend deadlines. People who give a damn. The invitation was clear. Claire wasn't just asking Nathan to lead the safety initiative implementation. She was asking him to be part of a fundamental restructuring of corporate values, to stand beside her as they fought against every instinct that prioritized profit over people. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what he'd been wanting to do for 4 years. "I'm in," Nathan said simply. "Whatever it takes." Claire's relief was visible. "Thank you. I know this is asking a lot, especially given that I've been avoiding you for 8 months and carrying enough guilt to sink a battleship." Nathan smiled slightly. "Yeah, it's a lot, but it's also the right thing to do. And I'm tired of letting fear and guilt dictate my choices." They worked together for another 2 hours, refining the presentation and anticipating board objections. Claire had an uncanny ability to predict exactly which executives would raise which concerns, and together they built counter-arguments for each one. By the time they finally called it a night, Nathan felt more prepared than he had for any presentation in his career. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Nathan rehearsed his sections of the presentation until Emma threatened to hide his laptop if he practiced one more time. He ran the numbers again and again, making sure every statistic was accurate and defensible. He contacted colleagues in other departments to gather additional testimonials, building a comprehensive picture of employee sentiment. Friday evening, Claire called him into her office for a final run-through. "You're ready," she said after he'd finished his sections. "The data is solid, the arguments are compelling, and you present with exactly the right balance of passion and professionalism." "But," Nathan heard the unspoken caveat, "but you need to be prepared for resistance, not just polite questions, actual hostility. Some of these board members built their careers in the old system. They genuinely believe that demanding hours and high pressure produce better results. They'll see this initiative as soft, as coddling employees, as competitive disadvantage." "How do you want me to handle that?" Claire considered the question carefully. "Don't get defensive. Don't argue from emotion. Just keep bringing it back to the data. Let the numbers speak for themselves. And if someone gets particularly aggressive," she smiled grimly, "let me handle them. That's what I'm there for." Nathan nodded, appreciating both the strategic advice and the protection it implied. "There's something else," Claire said, her tone shifting. "Something I need to tell you before Monday, about Lucas." Nathan's stomach dropped. "What about him?" Claire pulled out a file Nathan hadn't seen before, thinner than the incident reports, older looking. She opened it to reveal what looked like personal correspondence, emails printed on plain paper rather than official company letterhead. "I found these in Lucas's apartment after he died," Claire said quietly. "He kept physical copies of important emails, liked having paper backups of things that mattered to him. These," she gestured to the pages, "these are emails he sent to friends and family in the months before his accident, talking about work, about his concerns, about the pressure he was feeling." Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he took the file. The first email was dated 8 months before Lucas's death, sent to Claire herself. "Hey sis, the new project is intense but good. Challenging problems, tight deadlines, you know the drill. Brooks, my manager, keeps pushing back on the schedule, arguing we need more rest between sprints. I appreciate that he cares, but honestly, I think he worries too much." This is just how high-stakes engineering works, right? Nathan felt the words like a physical blow. Lucas had noticed his safety concerns and dismissed them as overcaution, had internalized the toxic messaging so completely that genuine care for employee well-being registered as weakness. The next email was to a college friend dated 4 months before the accident. "Work is crushing me, man. I love the technical challenges, but the hours are insane. We're averaging 60 to 70-hour weeks, and it's starting to show. I've made some stupid mistakes lately, nothing catastrophic, but not like me. Brooks has been great about it, actually. He told me to take a few days off, said the project could wait. But if I do that, the whole team suffers. Can't let them down." He knew he was exhausted, Nathan said, his voice hollow. He knew the pace was unsustainable, but he kept pushing anyway because he thought that's what good employees did. "Keep reading," Claire said gently. The third email, sent 2 weeks before Lucas's death, was addressed to his mother. "Mom, I'm okay. I know you worry when I don't call, but work has been crazy. There's this big deadline coming up, and we're all running on fumes. Brooks tried to get the executives to extend it, said we needed more time and rest, but they wouldn't budge. He even threatened to resign if they didn't implement better safety policies. Can you believe that? My manager was willing to quit to protect us, and they just brushed him off. Makes me respect him more, honestly. He's one of the good ones, even if the system is broken. Nathan's vision blurred. Lucas had known, had understood that Nathan was fighting for him, for all of them, against a system that refused to listen, had recognized the effort even as he continued working himself to exhaustion because the alternative was letting his team down. "Why are you showing me this?" Nathan asked, unable to keep the rawness out of his voice. "Because you need to know that Lucas didn't blame you. He saw exactly what was happening. A good manager trapped in a bad system, trying to protect his team against executives who didn't care. He respected you for fighting, even when you lost." Claire's own voice was thick with emotion. "Nathan, my brother died knowing that you tried to save him. That matters. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything." Claire leaned forward intently. "You've been carrying guilt for 4 years based on the belief that you failed Lucas. But he didn't see it as failure. He saw a manager who cared enough to fight, even against overwhelming odds. That's what he told our mother 2 weeks before he died, that you were one of the good ones." Nathan pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to overwhelm him. All this time, he'd imagined Lucas's final thoughts being anger at the manager who'd approved the deadly schedule, had tortured himself with visions of betrayal and abandonment. But Lucas had understood, had seen the impossible position Nathan was in, and respected him for it anyway. "I can't," Nathan's voice broke. "I can't do this right now. The presentation is Monday, and I can't. I know. I'm sorry." Claire stood quickly. "I shouldn't have shown you this right before the board meeting. I thought you deserved to know the truth, that carrying all this guilt is based on a false premise." "False premise," Nathan repeated bitterly. "He's still dead, Claire. Whether he blamed me or not, he's still gone." "Yes, he is, and that's a tragedy we both have to live with. But Nathan, there's a difference between accepting responsibility for what you could control and torturing yourself for what you couldn't. Lucas understood that difference. I think it's time you did too." Nathan stood abruptly, needing to move, to escape the confines of the office that suddenly felt suffocating. "I need to go home. Emma's waiting." "Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine." Nathan grabbed his briefcase, shoving papers inside without organization. "I'll see you Monday morning, 9:30, right?" "Right." Nathan, but he was already walking out, unable to stay in that room with Lucas's words echoing in his mind. Brooks is one of the good ones. The praise felt undeserved, impossible to accept when the end result had been death and grief and 4 years of survivors carrying guilt they couldn't shed. The elevator ride down felt endless. Nathan stared at his distorted reflection in the brushed metal doors, seeing a man who looked hollow and haunted despite the professional suit and carefully maintained composure. When the doors opened to the parking garage, he walked to his car on autopilot, his mind still stuck on those emails. He even threatened to resign if they didn't implement better safety policies. Lucas had known about that, had known Nathan was willing to sacrifice his career to protect the team. And he'd still died because sometimes knowing wasn't enough. Sometimes fighting wasn't enough. Sometimes the system won anyway. Nathan sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, letting the silence settle around him like a blanket. His phone buzzed, a text from Emma asking when he'd be home, but he couldn't make himself respond. Not yet. Not when his hands were shaking and his chest felt like someone was sitting on it. Finally, he forced himself to drive. The house was warm and lit when he pulled into the driveway, Emma's shadow visible through the kitchen window as she moved around making dinner. Nathan sat in the car for another moment, watching his daughter through the glass, thinking about how close he'd come to leaving her orphaned, how Lucas's sacrifice had given him 4 more years with Emma, 4 years he'd mostly squandered on guilt and avoidance. When he walked inside, Emma took one look at his face and set down the spatula she'd been using. "Dad? What happened?" "Nothing. Long day." Nathan tried to smile, knew he was failing. "That's not nothing." Emma moved closer, studying him with those 2 perceptive eyes. "Did something go wrong with the presentation prep?" "No, the presentation is fine. It's just—" Nathan stopped, unsure how much to share. Claire showed me some emails from Lucas before he died about the work situation, about what was happening. Emma's expression shifted to understanding, and reading his words made it real again. Made it complicated, Nathan corrected. I've spent 4 years thinking he must have blamed me, must have felt betrayed when I approved that schedule. But he didn't. He understood the position I was in. He even told his mother I was a good manager for trying to fight the executives. So why do you look more upset instead of less? Nathan sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Because it doesn't change the outcome. He still died. I still signed the schedule. Knowing he didn't blame me should make me feel better, but instead it just makes me feel worse, like I failed someone who believed in me. Emma sat beside him, tucking her legs under her in that way she'd been doing since she was small. Dad, can I tell you something Mom used to say? Nathan looked at his daughter, surprised. Emma rarely brought up her mother, the loss still too painful even after 7 years. She used to tell me that guilt was only useful if it changed behavior, Emma continued, that feeling bad about something you couldn't control was just wasting energy you could use to do better going forward. She leaned against Nathan's shoulder. I think she'd tell you that Lucas's emails are proof you were already doing better, that you were fighting to change things even before he died, and that torturing yourself for not being able to fix a broken system all by yourself is, what did she call it? Self-indulgent suffering. Nathan felt tears slip down his cheeks. His wife had indeed said that, during one of their arguments about his tendency to shoulder blame for things beyond his control. She'd accused him, lovingly but firmly, of indulging in guilt because it felt like taking responsibility, when really it was just avoiding the harder work of accepting his limitations. I miss her, Nathan whispered. I know. Me too. Emma squeezed his hand. But Dad, she'd want you to actually live your life, not spend it punishing yourself for being human. And I think Lucas would want the same thing. He told his mom you were a good manager. Don't prove him wrong by destroying yourself over something you couldn't prevent. The wisdom in Emma's words, wisdom beyond her years, earned through her own experience with grief and loss, cut through Nathan's defenses in a way nothing else had. She was right. His wife would have told him the same thing. Probably Lucas would have too, if he'd survived to see the aftermath. When did you get so smart? Nathan asked, the question becoming a familiar refrain. I told you. Good genes and a dad who taught me to think things through. Emma stood, pulling Nathan up with her. Now come help me with dinner. You promised we'd cook together more, and I'm holding you to it. They made stir-fry together, Emma chopping vegetables while Nathan managed the wok with more skill than he'd shown in recent months. They talked about her school project, about her friend drama, about everything except work and guilt and emails from dead engineers. And slowly, Nathan felt himself settle back into something resembling equilibrium. After dinner, while Emma was upstairs doing homework, Nathan pulled out his phone and stared at Claire's contact information. He should call her, apologize for running out of her office like that. Should thank her for showing him the emails even though they devastated him. Should say something to acknowledge the trust it took to share that piece of her grief. Instead, he sent a text. Thank you for showing me Lucas's emails. I needed to see them even though they hurt. You were right. He didn't blame me. That matters. Her response came within minutes. I'm sorry I ambushed you with them. I should have waited until after the presentation. Are you okay? Getting there. Emma helped put things in perspective. She sounds like an amazing kid. She is. See you Monday morning. Monday. We've got this, Nathan. Together. Nathan set down his phone and pulled out the presentation files one more time, reviewing his sections with fresh eyes. The data was solid, the arguments compelling, the case for change irrefutable. But underneath all of it was something more fundamental, a belief that people mattered more than profits, that human lives were valuable beyond their productive output, that creating a culture where employees could thrive was worth fighting for. Lucas had believed Nathan was worth fighting for, worth standing up to executives who wouldn't listen. Now it was Nathan's turn to fight for everyone else, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it was simply the right thing to do. The weekend passed in a haze of final preparations and nervous energy. Saturday, Nathan practiced his presentation sections while Emma timed him and offered feedback. Sunday, he forced himself to rest, to spend the day doing normal things rather than obsessing over board meeting scenarios. They went to a movie, had lunch at Emma's favorite restaurant, and didn't talk about work once. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and immediate. Nathan dressed carefully in his best suit, the one he saved for important occasions, and checked his reflection in the mirror with something approaching confidence. He looked professional, composed, ready. The shadows under his eyes had faded after 2 nights of decent sleep, and the tight set of his shoulders had relaxed into something more natural. "You've got this, Dad," Emma said over breakfast, her faith in him absolute. "Thanks, sweetheart. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You need to just be yourself and tell them the truth." Nathan kissed the top of her head and headed out into the morning. The office building felt different as Nathan walked through the lobby at 8:30. He'd arrived early, wanting time to settle himself before the 9:30 board meeting, but the extra hour felt more like a gift than a burden. He made coffee, reviewed his notes one final time, and at 9:15 headed up to the 8th floor conference room where the board convened. Claire was already there, setting up the presentation equipment with the kind of focused efficiency that reminded Nathan of her brother. She looked up as he entered, offering a small smile. "Ready?" she asked. "She, as I'll ever be." Nathan set down his materials and helped her finish the technical setup. "Remember, don't let them rattle you. The data speaks for itself, and if anyone gets out of line, you'll handle them. I know." Nathan met her eyes. "Claire, about Friday night, you don't need to apologize. I shouldn't have dropped that on you right before a major presentation." "I'm not apologizing, I'm thanking you." Nathan's voice was steady. "Those emails changed how I see what happened. Not completely, not enough to erase 4 years of guilt overnight, but enough to start believing that maybe I don't have to carry all of this alone." Claire's expression softened. "You never had to carry it alone, Nathan. I've been here the whole time, carrying the same weight. We just didn't realize we could share the burden." Before Nathan could respond, the conference room door opened and board members began filtering in. Executives in expensive suits carrying tablets and coffee, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to outright hostile. Nathan recognized several of them from his years at the company, including Marcus Chen, the CFO, who dismissed his safety concerns multiple times before Lucas's death. Chen caught Nathan's eye and nodded curtly, his face unreadable. The next 30 minutes would determine whether 4 years of fighting and grief and desperate attempts at redemption would result in meaningful change, or whether the system would win again, grinding down good intentions beneath the weight of quarterly earnings and competitive pressure. Nathan took his seat beside Claire at the head of the conference table, pulled up his first slide, and prepared to fight the most important battle of his career. For Lucas. For Emma. For every employee who deserved to go home safely at the end of the day. For himself, and the chance to finally transform guilt into purpose. The board chair called the meeting to order, and Nathan began to speak. "Good morning," Nathan began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "Thank you all for taking the time to hear this proposal. What we're presenting today represents 4 years of data collection, policy development, and measurable results from the operations department. More importantly, it represents a fundamental shift in how we value the people who make this company successful." He clicked to the first slide, a simple title card bearing the words, "The Lucas Whitfield Workplace Safety Initiative," alongside a photograph of Lucas that Claire had provided. Young, smiling, alive. The room went quiet, several board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Lucas Whitfield was a senior engineer who died 4 years ago in a car accident after working an overnight shift. Nathan continued, keeping his voice level despite the tightness in his chest. His death was ruled accidental, no criminal negligence was found, and the company implemented some procedural changes in response. But what we didn't do, what we failed to do, was address the systemic issues that made his death not just possible, but almost inevitable. Marcus Chen leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Nathan, we've been over this. The investigation cleared everyone involved. There was no policy violation." "You're right," Nathan said, meeting Chen's gaze directly. "There was no policy violation because our policies at the time were inadequate. They allowed for unsafe overtime, inadequate rest periods, and prioritized client deadlines over employee well-being. Lucas's death was entirely preventable, but it would have required us to value his life more than we valued a project timeline. The bluntness of the statement rippled through the room. Claire remained still beside him, a silent show of support that gave Nathan the courage to continue. Since Lucas's death, I've implemented comprehensive safety protocols in the operations department, Nathan said, clicking to the next slide showing incident reduction data. The results speak for themselves. Fatigue-related incidents down 73%, overtime hours reduced by 40%, employee retention up to a 5-year high. And despite working fewer hours, our productivity has increased 12%. That's operations, interjected Sarah Hoffman, the board member who oversaw human resources. A single department with specific technical requirements. You can't extrapolate those results company-wide. Actually, we can, Claire spoke up for the first time. We've been running pilot programs in engineering and sales over the past 6 months using Nathan's protocols. The results are consistent. Reduced hours correlate with improved performance, not decreased output. People who are rested make better decisions, produce higher quality work, and stay with the company longer. Nathan advanced to the next slide, showing the pilot program data Claire referenced. The numbers were even more striking than he'd hoped. Engineering errors down 38%, sales team retention up 22%, employee satisfaction scores climbing across every metric. The financial case is equally compelling, Nathan continued. Reduced turnover alone saves us approximately $15 million annually in recruitment, training, and lost productivity costs. Add in decreased workplace incidents, lower insurance premiums, and improved efficiency, and we're looking at total annual savings of $23 million. At what implementation cost? Chen asked sharply. Nathan had anticipated this question. Initial implementation across all departments will cost approximately $4.2 million. That includes technology infrastructure for automated monitoring, training programs for all managers, expanded wellness resources, and additional safety personnel. We recoup that investment in less than 3 months based on savings from reduced turnover alone. And what happens to our competitive position? This came from Robert Ashford, an older board member who'd been with the company since its founding. If we're asking employees to work fewer hours while our competitors are pushing harder, how do we stay ahead? By being smarter instead of just working longer, Claire answered before Nathan could. The data shows that innovation doesn't come from exhausted people grinding through their 100th consecutive hour. It comes from rested, engaged employees who have the mental bandwidth to think creatively and solve complex problems. We're not proposing we work less, we're proposing we work better. Nathan clicked to a slide comparing their company's innovation metrics against industry competitors. Companies with strong workplace well-being programs show 28% higher rates of innovation and 31% better problem-solving outcomes. The correlation between employee well-being and competitive advantage is well documented. We're not handicapping ourselves. We're positioning ourselves to outperform. This sounds idealistic, Chen said, leaning back in his chair. In theory, treating employees well leads to better outcomes. In practice, deadlines are real. Client demands are non-negotiable, and sometimes you need people to push through difficult periods. Difficult periods, yes, Nathan agreed. Unsustainable schedules that literally kill people? No. There's a difference between occasional overtime during crunch periods and a culture that normalizes working people until they collapse. We're drawing a line between necessary flexibility and systematic abuse. The room went very quiet. Nathan had just used the word abuse in a board meeting, a level of directness that probably violated every unspoken rule of corporate diplomacy. But he was done dancing around the truth. That's a strong accusation, Ashford said slowly. It's an accurate one, Nathan replied. When we create conditions where an employee feels they can't refuse unsafe work without jeopardizing their career, that's abuse. When we celebrate people who sacrifice their health for projects, that's abuse. When we allow managers to ignore safety concerns because meeting a deadline is more important than someone's life, that's abuse. Lucas Whitfield died because this company systematically abused its employees in the name of productivity. I'm proposing we stop. Claire's hand found Nathan's under the table, a brief squeeze of support that steadied him. He'd gone further than they'd planned in the presentation, let his emotion show more than was strategically wise. But the truth needed to be said without euphemism or corporate softening. Nathan, Sarah Hoffman said carefully, We appreciate your passion on this issue. We know you worked closely with Lucas and his death affected you deeply. But let's be clear about something. This company did not kill Lucas Whitfield. He made a choice to work that shift. He got behind the wheel of a car when he was too tired to drive safely. Those were his decisions. The implication was clear. Lucas bore responsibility for his own death. Nathan felt Claire tense beside him, knew she was preparing to unleash the kind of executive fury that could end careers. But he put his hand on her arm, asking silently for the chance to respond himself. "You're right that Lucas made choices," Nathan said quietly. "But those choices were made within a system that gave him no real alternatives. He could work the unsafe shift, or he could let his entire team down. He could drive home exhausted, or he could sleep in the office and face questions about his commitment. He could push through fatigue, or he could risk being seen as someone who couldn't handle the pressure." Nathan paused, making sure everyone was listening. "We created an environment where the choice was between sacrificing his health or sacrificing his career. That's not a real choice. That's coercion." "So you're saying employees have no agency?" Chen challenged. "That they're just victims of corporate culture with no responsibility for their own decisions?" "I'm saying that culture shapes behavior more powerfully than individual willpower," Nathan countered. "When we glorify overwork, when we promote people who sacrifice everything for their jobs, when we make rest seem like weakness, we're not giving employees choices. We're programming them to destroy themselves for our benefit." He clicked to the next slide, showing testimonials from employees across multiple departments. One in particular stood out, written by a young analyst who'd nearly had a nervous breakdown before the new policies were implemented. "This is from someone in the finance department," Nathan said. She writes, "I used to think being a good employee meant saying yes to everything, working through weekends, answering emails at midnight. I was having panic attacks before meetings and couldn't sleep without medication. Then my manager told me the new policies meant I had to stop working after 6 p.m. unless there was a true emergency. At first I thought I was being fired. It took me 3 months to believe that leaving on time wouldn't end my career. Now I'm healthier, happier, and my work quality has improved because I can actually think clearly. That's what we're fighting for. People who can do their jobs without destroying their health in the process." Sarah Hoffman was reading through additional testimonials on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. "These are compelling, Nathan, but I'm concerned about enforcement. How do we ensure managers actually follow these policies when they're under pressure to deliver?" "Accountability measures," Claire said, pulling up a slide Nathan had helped her prepare. "Managers will be evaluated not just on project outcomes, but on how well they protect their team's well-being. Violations of safety protocols will be grounds for termination, regardless of the person's seniority or value to the company. We're making it clear that this isn't optional or negotiable." "You're talking about firing successful managers for working their teams too hard?" Ashford sounded incredulous. "If they're violating policies designed to keep people alive, yes, absolutely," Claire said without hesitation. "We can't implement these changes while keeping managers who actively undermine them. Either we're serious about employee well-being or we're not. There's no middle ground." Nathan watched the board members exchange glances, some skeptical, some intrigued, all clearly wrestling with the implications of what they were hearing. This wasn't a minor policy adjustment, it was a complete restructuring of corporate values and priorities. "I want to address something directly," Nathan said, deciding to take one more risk. 4 years ago, I sent 47 emails warning about unsafe work conditions. I filed 6 formal complaints. I threatened to resign twice if safety protocols weren't improved. Every single time, I was overruled by executives who prioritized deadlines over employee safety. Then Lucas Whitfield died, and suddenly everyone cared about workplace safety. We commissioned investigations, implemented minor procedural changes, and told ourselves we'd learned our lesson." He paused, letting that sink in. "But we didn't learn the lesson. We put a Band-Aid on a systemic problem and hoped it would be enough. Well, it wasn't. The culture that killed Lucas is still here, still pressuring people to work unsustainable hours, still treating employee well-being as a nice-to-have instead of a fundamental requirement. This initiative," he gestured to the presentation slides, "is our chance to actually fix what's broken instead of just managing the symptoms." "What happens if we don't approve this?" asked Jennifer Park, one of the newer board members who'd been quiet until now. Claire and Nathan exchanged a glance. They discussed this scenario, debated how to handle it if the board rejected the proposal. "Then I'll resign," Claire said calmly. "I didn't take this CEO position to maintain a status quo that kills people. If this board isn't willing to prioritize employee safety, then I'm not the right leader for this company." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Board members leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. Chen looked stunned. Ashford appeared angry. Hoffman seemed genuinely worried. "Claire, that's an extreme response," Chen said. "We're having a productive conversation here. No one's rejecting anything yet." "I'm not being extreme, Marcus. I'm being clear about my priorities," Claire replied, her voice steady but firm. "My brother died because this company valued profits over people. I won't perpetuate that system. Either we commit to genuine change, or I step aside and let someone else run things. Those are the only two options I can live with." Nathan felt his respect for Claire multiply. She wasn't bluffing, wasn't using her resignation as a negotiating tactic. She genuinely meant it. Just as he'd been willing to resign 4 years ago over safety concerns, she was willing to walk away now if the board wouldn't support fundamental reform. "And what about you, Nathan?" Ashford asked. "Are you prepared to resign too if we don't rubber stamp this proposal?" Nathan considered the question carefully. 4 years ago, he'd submitted his resignation and the board had rejected it, keeping him on because they valued his expertise. Now the same choice stood before him, but from a position of greater understanding. "If this proposal is rejected, I'll continue working here," Nathan said slowly. "But I'll also continue fighting for these changes through every channel available. I'll document every safety violation, file formal complaints with regulatory agencies, and make sure everyone, employees, shareholders, the public, knows that this company had the chance to implement life-saving policies and chose not to. I won't leave, Mr. Ashford, but I will make sure the truth is visible." The implicit threat was clear. Nathan wasn't proposing a quiet resignation. He was promising a very public battle if the board chose profits over people. "You're both overreacting," Chen said, frustration creeping into his voice. "No one here wants employees to die. We all agree safety is important, but you're presenting this as an all-or-nothing ultimatum when it should be a nuanced conversation about balancing multiple priorities." "There's no balance between life and death," Claire said. "Either we create conditions where people can work safely or we don't. Either we value employee well-being or we value quarterly earnings more. It's not nuanced, Marcus. It's a choice." Sarah Hoffman raised her hand, a gesture that seemed oddly formal in the tense conference room. "Can I say something?" Claire nodded. "I've been with this company for 12 years, Hoffman said. "I've seen us grow from a mid-sized regional player to a national competitor. I've celebrated our successes and defended our reputation. But I've also watched good people burn out, seen talented employees leave for companies that treated them better, and fielded too many complaints about unsustainable work expectations." She looked around the table at her fellow board members. "What Nathan and Claire are proposing isn't radical, it's overdue. We should have implemented these changes 4 years ago when Nathan first raised the concerns. We didn't, and someone died. How many more deaths will it take before we actually listen?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and damning. Jennifer Park spoke up next. "I joined this board 6 months ago specifically because Claire convinced me she was building something different here, something that proved you could be profitable and ethical simultaneously. If we reject this proposal, we're telling her, and everyone watching, that we were lying. That profit always comes first, employee well-being always comes second. I'm not comfortable with that message." Slowly, the tide in the room began to shift. Not dramatically, not with sudden unanimous support, but with the gradual recognition that this wasn't just about policy implementation. It was about the fundamental character of the company. "I want to see the full implementation plan," Ashford said finally. "Timeline, budget breakdown, accountability measures, everything. And I want quarterly reports on outcomes, not just safety metrics, but productivity and profitability too. If this initiative delivers what you're promising, I'll support it. If it doesn't deliver results within 18 months, I'll resign without requiring the board to ask," Claire said. "I'm that confident in the data and the approach." Ashford nodded slowly. "Then let's see the details." The next 2 hours were spent dissecting every aspect of the proposal: budget allocations, training requirements, technology infrastructure, manager accountability frameworks, employee communication strategies. Nathan fielded technical questions about implementation logistics, while Claire handled the strategic and financial queries. They worked as a seamless team, anticipating each other's points and building on each other's arguments. By the time the meeting adjourned at 1:30, the board had granted provisional approval pending review of the detailed implementation plan. It wasn't the enthusiastic endorsement Nathan had hoped for, but it was enough. The initiative would move forward. As board members filed out of the conference room, several stopped to shake Nathan's hand or offer words of support. Sarah Hoffman pulled him aside briefly. "That took courage," she said quietly, "standing up there and telling us we'd been complicit in creating unsafe conditions. Most managers would have softened that message to protect their careers." "I've spent 4 years protecting my career instead of speaking truth," Nathan replied. "I'm done with that approach." Hoffman smiled slightly. "I can see why Claire wanted you leading this initiative. You actually give a damn." When the room finally emptied, only Nathan and Claire remained, surrounded by the detritus of the presentation. Empty coffee cups, scattered papers, tablets displaying charts and data. Claire sank into a chair, the professional composure finally cracking to show exhaustion underneath. "We did it." "You threatened to resign," Nathan said, still processing. "That wasn't part of the plan." "Neither was you calling them out for abuse, but it was necessary." Claire looked up at him. "They needed to understand we were serious, that this wasn't just corporate theater or a PR initiative. We meant every word." Nathan sat down across from her, feeling the adrenaline of the past few hours slowly draining away to leave behind bone-deep weariness. "Do you think it'll actually work? The implementation, the culture change, all of it?" "I think we have a real chance," Claire said. "Not a guarantee, but a chance. The board gave us provisional approval, which means we have 18 months to prove the concept works. If we can show measurable results, improved safety, maintained profitability, better employee outcomes, they'll support full institutionalization. And if we can't, then I resign like I promised, and you continue fighting like you promised. And hopefully the next CEO cares as much as we do." Claire's smile was tired but genuine. "But I don't think it'll come to that, Nathan. The data is too strong. The case is too compelling. We just need to execute well." Nathan's phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "How did it go?" He typed back. "Board gave provisional approval. Still need to finalize details, but we're moving forward." Her response came immediately. "I knew you could do it. So proud of you, Dad." Nathan showed the message to Claire, who smiled. "Your daughter sounds amazing," she said. "She's the reason I'm still here," Nathan admitted. "After Lucas died, I wanted to quit. Wanted to walk away from the guilt and the memories and start completely over somewhere else. But Emma needed stability, needed me to show her that facing hard things was better than running from them. So I stayed and fought instead. I'm glad you did. If you'd left, this initiative would never have happened." Claire stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting. "Nathan, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "When you look at Lucas's picture now, in the presentation, or when you think about him, what do you feel?" Nathan considered the question carefully. A week ago, the answer would have been immediate: guilt, regret, crushing responsibility. But now, after their conversations and Lucas's emails and the board presentation, the answer was more complex. "I feel sad that he's gone," Nathan said slowly. "I feel angry at the system that made his death possible. I feel determined to make sure it never happens again. And I feel..." He paused, searching for the right word. "I feel grateful that he thought I was worth fighting for. That he saw me as one of the good ones, even when I couldn't see that in myself." Claire's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He would be proud of what you're building, what we're building together." "I hope so." They packed up the presentation materials in companionable silence, both processing the magnitude of what they'd just accomplished. As they headed toward the elevator, Claire stopped suddenly. "Nathan, I know this is probably too soon, and you can absolutely say no, but would you want to have dinner sometime? Not a work meeting, just dinner. Two people who've been through similar experiences trying to figure out how to move forward." The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications Nathan wasn't sure he was ready to examine. "I don't know if I'm ready for—" he began. "Neither do I," Claire interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for anything more than dinner and conversation. No expectations, no pressure, just two people who understand each other sharing a meal." Nathan thought about his conversation with Emma, about her wisdom that he needed to actually live his life instead of just atoning for the past. Thought about how Claire was the only person who truly understood the guilt he carried because she carried the same burden. Thought about the possibility that healing didn't have to be a solitary journey. "Okay," he said. "Dinner sounds good." Claire's smile was like sunrise. "Really? Really, but somewhere casual. And I need to be home by 9 because Emma has a science project due Tuesday, and I promised to help." "Casual by 9 works perfectly." Claire pressed the elevator button. "How about Wednesday? There's a good Italian place near the office." "Wednesday works." The elevator arrived and they stepped inside, the doors closing on a day that had fundamentally shifted both their professional and personal trajectories. Nathan caught his reflection in the elevator's polished walls. Still the same tired face, same shadows under the eyes, same man who'd been running from his CEO for 8 months. But something in his expression had changed. The haunted quality had softened, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. When Nathan arrived home that evening, Emma met him at the door with a homemade banner reading, "Congratulations, Dad," stretched across the hallway. "You made a banner?" Nathan laughed, genuinely delighted. "Of course I made a banner. You just convinced a bunch of executives to completely change how they run the company. That deserves celebration." Emma grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the kitchen where she'd laid out his favorite takeout, Thai food from the place 3 blocks away. "I ordered dinner so we could celebrate properly." They ate together, Nathan recounting the board meeting in detail while Emma listened with fierce attention. He told her about Claire's resignation threat, about his own promise to keep fighting regardless of the outcome, about the gradual shift as board members recognized the importance of what they were proposing. "So it's really happening?" Emma asked. "The safety initiative?" "It's really happening. 18 months to prove it works. But yes, we're moving forward." Emma raised her water glass in a toast. "To Lucas Whitfield, and making sure his death means something." Nathan clinked his glass against hers, the simple gesture carrying the weight of 4 years of grief and guilt just beginning, to transform into something resembling purpose. "Also," Emma said, her tone shifting to something more casual, "Claire sounds really cool." "She is. And you're having dinner with her Wednesday?" Nathan nearly choked on his pad thai. "How did you—" "I didn't mention that part." "You got that look on your face when you were talking about her. The same look you used to get when you talked about Mom, like the person matters in a way that goes beyond just work or friendship." Emma's smile was knowing. "It's okay to like her, Dad. Mom would want you to be happy." "It's just dinner," Nathan protested weakly. "Sure it is." Emma's grin was pure mischief. "Just dinner with the woman you've spent 8 months avoiding because looking at her hurt too much, who understands your guilt better than anyone, and who threatened to resign rather than compromise on things she believes in. Totally just dinner." Nathan threw a napkin at his daughter, who dodged it easily, laughing. But later that night, after Emma had gone to bed and Nathan was cleaning up the kitchen, he found himself thinking about Wednesday. About sitting across from Claire at a casual Italian restaurant, talking about things that weren't work or guilt or dead brothers. About the possibility that two people bonded by shared tragedy might find a way toward something that looked like healing. He pulled up Lucas's emails on his phone, reading through them one more time. The words that had devastated him Friday night now felt different. Not absolution exactly, but permission. Permission to believe he'd done his best in an impossible situation. Permission to honor Lucas's memory without destroying himself in the process. Permission to move forward while still carrying the past. "Brooks is one of the good ones," Lucas had written to his mother. Nathan was determined to prove him right, not by working himself to exhaustion or carrying guilt until it crushed him, but by building something better. By creating a workplace culture where employees were valued, where safety mattered more than deadlines, where people like Lucas could thrive without sacrificing their health and lives. By choosing to live fully instead of just surviving. By believing that healing and happiness weren't betrayals of the dead, but honors to their memory. Nathan looked at the calendar on his phone. Wednesday was 2 days away. 2 days to prepare for a dinner that was definitely just dinner, except it wasn't, not really. It was the beginning of something he couldn't quite name yet, but was finally ready to explore. He thought about Claire standing in the boardroom, firm and fearless, as she threatened to resign over principles. Thought about her showing him Lucas's emails, even though it hurt both of them. Thought about the way she'd squeezed his hand under the conference table when he'd called the old system abusive. Two people who understood each other's pain. Two people trying to build something better from the wreckage of shared loss. It was terrifying. It was also, Nathan was beginning to realize, exactly what he needed. Wednesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of early autumn evening that felt borrowed from summer. Nathan changed his shirt 3 times before Emma finally appeared in his doorway, arms crossed, and wearing an expression of amused exasperation. "Dad, it's just dinner, remember?" she said, echoing his own words from days earlier. "I know, I just want to look professional, casual, like you didn't spend an hour obsessing over what to wear." Emma walked into his room and pulled out a dark blue button-down from his closet. "This one. It's nice without trying too hard." Nathan took the shirt, grateful for his daughter's intervention. "When did you become the parent here?" "Around the time you started acting like a nervous teenager." Emma's grin was infectious. "Seriously though, Dad, just be yourself." That's who she asked to dinner. 20 minutes later, Nathan pulled into the parking lot of Marco's, the Italian restaurant Claire had suggested. It was indeed casual, red check tablecloths visible through the windows, the warm glow of overhead lights, the kind of neighborhood place where the staff knew regulars by name. Not a power lunch spot or a corporate entertainment venue, just a restaurant where 2 people could have a conversation. Claire was already seated at a corner table when Nathan walked in, and the sight of her stopped him momentarily. She'd changed from her usual executive attire into jeans and a simple green sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, and when she smiled at him, the professional distance that usually defined their interactions simply evaporated. "Hi," Nathan said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hi yourself. Traffic okay?" "Fine. Emma helped me pick out a shirt." Claire laughed. "She sounds like she has good judgment. That's a good shirt." They ordered pasta for him, risotto for her, a bottle of red wine to share, and for a few minutes occupied themselves with the comfortable rituals of a meal. But the conversation Nathan had been both anticipating and dreading hung between them, waiting. "So," Claire said finally, setting down her wine glass, "I promised this wouldn't be a work dinner, but I feel like we should acknowledge the elephant in the room before we can talk about anything else." "Lucas," Nathan said. "Lucas. And the fact that we've spent weeks processing 4 years of grief and guilt, and now we're sitting across from each other in a casual restaurant pretending we're just 2 normal people having dinner." Nathan appreciated her directness. "We're not normal people having dinner." "No, we're not." Claire's smile was sad. "We're 2 people who lost someone important and spent years blaming ourselves for it. 2 people who accidentally found each other while trying to honor his memory. 2 people who have absolutely no idea what we're doing right now." "That about sums it up," Nathan agreed. "So let's start there, with honesty." Claire leaned forward slightly. "Nathan, I asked you to dinner not just because I think you're a good person or because we work well together. I asked because, for the first time since Lucas died, I've met someone who understands what it feels like to carry the kind of guilt that doesn't have simple answers. Someone who gets why I can't just move on or let it go, even though that's what everyone keeps telling me to do." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Everyone told me the same thing, the counselor, the board, even Emma in her own way. They all meant well, but none of them understood that letting go felt like betraying Lucas, like saying his death didn't matter enough to stay broken over. Exactly. Claire's eyes brightened with recognition. If I healed too quickly, if I stopped feeling guilty, what did that say about how much he meant to me? So I stayed guilty, stayed angry, stayed focused on fixing what broke him, because at least that felt like loyalty. "But it wasn't loyalty," Nathan said slowly, working through the realization even as he spoke it. "It was fear. Fear that if we stopped punishing ourselves, we'd lose the last connection we had to him." Claire went very still, her wine glass suspended halfway to her lips. That's it exactly. The guilt kept him present. Let it go, and he disappears completely. They sat with that truth for a long moment, the restaurant bustling around them with ordinary conversations and clinking silverware and lives untouched by the particular grief they carried. Emma told me something last week, Nathan said. She said Mom, my late wife, used to say that guilt was only useful if it changed behavior. That feeling bad about something you couldn't control was just wasting energy you could use to do better going forward. Your wife sounds like she was wise. She was. And she was right. I've been wasting 4 years feeling guilty about not being able to fix a broken system all by myself, when I could have spent that time actually building something better. Nathan paused. Which I guess I was doing, but not intentionally, not in a way that felt like healing instead of penance. The safety initiative feels different though, doesn't it? Claire asked. Not like penance, like purpose. Because we're doing it together. The words came out before Nathan could filter them, too honest and too revealing. But Claire didn't look uncomfortable. She looked relieved. Yes, because we're doing it together. Because you're the only person who understands why this matters so much, why I can't compromise on it, why getting it right is about more than just good policy. Their food arrived, providing a natural break in the intensity of the conversation. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Nathan realized this was the first meal he'd shared with a woman who wasn't Emma in years. The first time he'd sat across from someone and felt seen in a way that went beyond professional competence or parental responsibility. Can I ask you something personal? Nathan said eventually. After everything we've shared, I think we're past the point of keeping things surface level. Why did you really take the CEO position? You said it was to honor Lucas's memory, to fix the culture that killed him. But you could have done that from outside the company, could have advocated for industry-wide changes, worked with regulators, pushed for legislation. Why come back to the specific place where your brother died? Claire set down her fork, considering the question with the same careful attention she gave to strategic decisions. Because leaving would have felt like running, like declaring the company irredeemable and washing my hands of responsibility. But staying, coming back as CEO, meant I had the power to actually fix what was broken, instead of just criticizing from a distance. That's the professional answer. What's the personal one? Claire smiled slightly. You're good at seeing through corporate speak. 4 years of practice. The personal answer is that I needed to face the place where Lucas died, to walk the same hallways, work in the same building, see the desk where he used to sit. I needed to transform those spaces from sites of trauma into places of healing. Does that make sense? Nathan nodded. It made perfect sense. He'd done the same thing by staying in operations, by fighting to change the department where Lucas had worked his final shift. Geography mattered. You couldn't heal from trauma by pretending the place it happened didn't exist. I avoided you for 8 months because looking at your face reminded me of the hospital corridor, Nathan admitted. Your eyes are the same as his, same color, same intensity. Every time I saw you, I remembered making the phone calls, telling his family what happened, watching them fall apart. I avoided looking directly at you too, Claire confessed. I knew who you were from the files before I even took the position. Knew you were the manager who'd been there that night. And I kept thinking, if I just didn't make eye contact, didn't acknowledge you too directly, I could keep my professional distance and not have to confront my own complicated feelings about what happened. How are we doing now, with the eye contact? Claire looked directly at him, holding his gaze with deliberate intention. Better. Because I'm not seeing Lucas when I look at you anymore. I'm seeing Nathan, someone who fought for my brother even when it cost him. Someone who carries grief with the same fierce determination I do. Someone who's choosing to build something meaningful instead of just surviving. Nathan felt heat rise in his face, the compliment more affecting than any professional praise he'd ever received. I'm seeing Claire too. Not just Lucas's sister, not just the CEO. Someone who's brave enough to threaten resignation over principles, who turned her grief into action, who understands that healing doesn't mean forgetting. The air between them shifted, became charged with possibility neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. They weren't just colleagues united by shared loss anymore. They were two people discovering genuine connection, attraction even, built on the foundation of understanding each other's deepest pain. This is terrifying, Claire said softly. Completely, Nathan agreed. I haven't had dinner with someone like this since before Lucas died. Haven't let myself think about anything beyond work and fixing the company and making sure his death mattered. I haven't even looked at another woman since my wife died 7 years ago. Haven't considered that I might want companionship or connection or anything beyond being Emma's father and doing my job. So what are we doing? Claire asked. Nathan considered the question carefully, knowing his answer mattered. I think we're letting ourselves be human. Letting ourselves want something beyond grief and guilt and endless atonement. Letting ourselves believe that honoring the dead doesn't require destroying ourselves in the process. Claire reached across the table, her hand finding his. The touch was tentative, testing, but when Nathan didn't pull away, she let her fingers intertwine with his. I'm not ready for anything serious, she said. I'm still figuring out who I am beyond Lucas's grieving sister and the CEO trying to fix everything. Neither am I. I'm still the anxious single dad who second-guesses every decision and can't quite believe he deserves to be happy. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. But maybe we could figure it out together, slowly, carefully, with no expectations beyond honesty and showing up? I'd like that. Claire's smile was tentative but genuine. Though I should warn you, Emma might have opinions about this. Nathan laughed. Emma already has opinions about this. She pointed out that I got a specific look on my face when talking about you. Apparently it's the same look I used to get talking about her mother. Is that terrifying or encouraging? Both, mostly encouraging. Nathan paused. She said her mom would want me to be happy, that punishing myself forever wasn't honoring her memory, it was wasting the life she'd want me to live. Your daughter is remarkably wise for 13. She's had to grow up faster than she should have. Lost her mother at 6, watched her father nearly destroy himself with guilt over a workplace accident. She's learned to see through excuses and call out self-destructive behavior because she's had to. Claire's expression softened with understanding, and something that might have been admiration. I'd like to meet her. Properly, I mean. Not just as your CEO checking in on work-life balance, but as someone who's part of your life. The casualness of the statement belied its significance. Claire wasn't just suggesting a meal with his daughter. She was proposing integration into the personal life Nathan had kept carefully separate from work for years. She'd like that, Nathan said. Though, fair warning, she'll absolutely interrogate you about your intentions and whether you're good enough for her dad. I can handle interrogation. I survived a hostile board meeting on Monday. They finished dinner slowly, conversation drifting to lighter topics. Favorite books? Travel dreams deferred by demanding careers, childhood memories that shaped who they'd become. Nathan found himself laughing more than he had in months, the easy humor between them a stark contrast to the heavy emotional processing that had defined their recent interactions. When the check came, they argued good-naturedly over who should pay before splitting it down the middle, both of them aware this was setting a precedent for whatever came next. Outside the restaurant, the autumn evening had cooled to something crisp and comfortable. They stood in the parking lot, neither quite ready to say goodbye, both aware that this dinner had shifted something fundamental between them. Thank you for tonight, Claire said. For being honest, for showing up, for taking a risk on something that's probably complicated and definitely terrifying. Thank you for asking, Nathan replied. For seeing past the manager who avoided you for 8 months to the person underneath who was just scared and grieving. Claire stepped closer, the movement deliberate but cautious. Can I hug you? Is that okay? Nathan answered by opening his arms, and Claire stepped into them with the kind of relief that spoke to how rarely either of them allowed themselves physical comfort. They stood there in the parking lot, holding each other with a tenderness born from shared understanding, and Nathan felt something in his chest that had been clenched tight for 4 years finally begin to ease. We're going to figure this out, Claire murmured against his shoulder. The initiative, the grief, whatever this is between us. We're going to figure it out because we're not doing it alone anymore. Together, Nathan agreed, the word feeling like a promise. They separated slowly, reluctantly, and stood looking at each other in the parking lot lights with small smiles and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Text me when you get home? Claire asked. I will. You too. Nathan drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air clear his head and settle his thoughts. The evening had been everything he'd feared and hoped for. Intense, vulnerable, honest, and ultimately healing in a way he hadn't expected. He and Claire had laid out their damage in the open, examined it together, and decided that maybe two broken people could help each other become whole. When he pulled into his driveway, Emma was waiting at the window, her silhouette visible through the living room curtains. She opened the door before he'd even made it up the walkway. "So?" she demanded. "How was it?" "It was good, sweetheart. Really good." "Just good? Dad, you were gone for 3 hours. That's not just good, that's significant." Nathan laughed and pulled his daughter into a hug. "It was significant. We talked about Lucas, about the guilt we've both been carrying, about the possibility of moving forward while still honoring the past. And the possibility of you two being more than just work colleagues?" Emma's voice was knowing. "That too, but slowly, carefully. No rushing into anything." Emma pulled back to look at him seriously. "Dad, I need you to hear me on this. I want you to be happy. I want you to have someone in your life who understands you and makes you laugh and gives you a reason to come home at reasonable hours. Mom would want that too. So if Claire is that person, or could be that person, don't sabotage it with guilt or fear or thinking you don't deserve good things." Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "When did you become so wise?" "I keep telling you, good genes." Emma smiled. "Also, therapy. The school counselor has been really helpful with processing my own feelings about losing Mom and watching you struggle." "You've been seeing the school counselor?" "For 6 months. I didn't tell you because you had enough on your plate, but yeah, Miss Rodriguez has helped me understand that it's okay to be happy even when we've lost people we love. That moving forward isn't betrayal." Nathan pulled Emma close again, overwhelmed by how much his daughter had been handling on her own while he'd been lost in his own grief and guilt. "I'm sorry I didn't notice. I should have been more present, more aware of what you were dealing with. You were dealing with your own stuff. It's okay." Emma squeezed him tight. "But Dad, I think you're ready now, ready to actually live instead of just surviving, and I'm really glad." They went inside together, Emma chattering about her school day while Nathan made them both tea. It was a small domestic scene, unremarkable in its ordinariness, but Nathan found himself savoring it in a way he hadn't in years. This was what he'd been fighting for, the ability to be present with his daughter, to enjoy simple moments, to build a life worth living instead of just enduring. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Home safe. Thank you again for tonight. I haven't felt this hopeful in a long time." Nathan typed back, "Me either. Same time next week?" "It's a date. Literally." Emma glanced over his shoulder, reading the exchange with undisguised interest. "She seems nice." "She is nice, also intimidating, brilliant, and carrying about as much emotional baggage as I am." "Perfect match, then," Emma said with a grin. The next morning, Nathan arrived at work to find an email from the board's administrative assistant scheduling weekly check-ins on the safety initiative implementation. The provisional approval had been formalized, budget allocated, timeline established. It was real. They were actually going to do this. Nathan spent the day meeting with department heads, explaining the new protocols and accountability measures. Some were enthusiastic, seeing the changes as long overdue. Others were skeptical, worried about how reduced hours would affect their ability to meet deadlines. Nathan addressed each concern with the data he and Claire had compiled, showing how sustainable work practices improved rather than hindered performance. By late afternoon, he'd secured buy-in from operations, engineering, and sales. Marketing and finance were still on the fence, but willing to participate in the pilot expansion. Only one department head, Robert Chen's nephew in business development, was openly hostile, arguing the changes would make them non-competitive. Nathan scheduled a follow-up meeting with him for the next day, knowing some people would require more convincing than others. That evening, Claire stopped by his office just as he was packing up. "How'd the department meetings go?" she asked, leaning against his doorframe. "Mostly positive. A few skeptics, one outright opponent in business development." "Let me guess. James Chen? You know him?" "I know his uncle was one of the executives who overrode your safety concerns 4 years ago. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Claire's expression hardened. "If he can't get on board with the initiative, we'll replace him. I meant what I said about accountability. Let me try talking to him first. Sometimes people just need the right framing. Always giving people second chances, Claire said with a small smile. It's one of your better qualities. Or one of my more naive ones. No, it's better. I'm too quick to cut people off when they disagree with me. You actually try to bring them along. Claire stepped into his office, closing the door behind her. Speaking of which, I got an interesting call today from Sarah Hoffman. She wanted to discuss the possibility of expanding the initiative beyond just workplace safety. Nathan looked up with interest. Expanding how? Comprehensive wellness programs, mental health resources, financial counseling, childcare support, flexible work arrangements. She thinks if we're going to transform the culture, we should go all the way. Make this a place where people can actually thrive in all aspects of their lives, not just avoid being worked to death. That's ambitious. It's also right, and it builds on what we've already started. Claire pulled out her phone, showing him an outline Hoffman had sent. She wants to pilot it in 3 departments over the next 6 months, then roll it out company-wide if results are positive. Nathan scanned the proposal, seeing the potential immediately. Workplace safety was crucial, but it was just one piece of employee well-being. Comprehensive support addressed the reality that people had lives beyond work, families, health concerns, financial pressures, that all affected their ability to perform. This is what Lucas would have wanted, Nathan said quietly. Not just safe working conditions, but genuine support for the whole person. I think so too. Claire sat down across from his desk. Nathan, I want you to co-lead this expansion with Hoffman. She has the HR expertise, you have the operational knowledge and the trust of employees. Together, you could build something extraordinary. That's a lot of responsibility on top of the safety initiative implementation. I know, but I also know you can handle it. And more importantly, I know you care enough to do it right. Claire paused. Also, selfishly, it means we'll be working together more closely, which I'm finding I like quite a lot. Nathan smiled despite himself. Mixing professional collaboration with personal connection, what could possibly go wrong? Everything, or nothing. We won't know unless we try. They worked together for another hour, refining the wellness expansion proposal and identifying potential obstacles. It was comfortable in a way Nathan hadn't experienced with a colleague before, the easy back and forth of 2 people who trusted each other's judgment and genuinely enjoyed the collaboration. When Claire finally left for the evening, Nathan sat alone in his office thinking about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. He'd gone from avoiding his CEO and drowning in guilt to co-leading a company-wide culture transformation and cautiously exploring a relationship with someone who understood his deepest wounds. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and felt like finally stepping out of the shadows he'd been hiding in for 4 years. The following weeks passed in a blur of implementation meetings, training sessions, and gradual culture shifts. The safety protocols rolled out department by department, with Nathan and his team monitoring compliance and outcomes. Early results were promising. Overtime hours dropped, employee satisfaction increased, and productivity remained stable or improved across pilot departments. There were challenges, of course. James Chen continued to resist until Claire made good on her promise and replaced him with someone more aligned with the company's new values. A few managers struggled to adjust to the accountability measures, requiring additional coaching, or in 2 cases, termination when they repeatedly violated protocols. But mostly, the changes were working. Employees reported feeling valued in ways they hadn't before. Managers discovered that supporting their team's well-being didn't weaken performance. It strengthened it. The culture that had killed Lucas Whitfield was slowly being dismantled and replaced with something healthier. Nathan and Claire fell into a rhythm of weekly dinners, each one deepening their connection while maintaining the careful boundaries they'd established. They talked about work, about grief, about their hopes for the future. They met each other's families. Emma charmed Claire immediately with her directness and humor, while Claire's mother welcomed Nathan with the kind of warmth that suggested she was just grateful her daughter was finally letting someone in. 3 months into the implementation, the board requested a progress report. Nathan and Claire presented together, showing the dramatic improvements in employee metrics alongside sustained financial performance. Even the most skeptical board members couldn't argue with the data. The initiative was working exactly as promised. I have to admit, I had my doubts. Marcus Chen said during the Q&A session. But these results are remarkable. You've proven that prioritizing employee well-being is good business, not just good ethics. That was always the case, Claire replied. We just needed the courage to prove it. 6 months in, the company was transformed. The Lucas Whitfield Workplace Safety Initiative had expanded to include comprehensive wellness programs, flexible work arrangements, and robust mental health support. Employee retention was at a 10-year high. Recruitment became easier as word spread about the company's culture. Productivity and profitability both increased, defying predictions that humane workplace policies would hurt the bottom line. Nathan walked through the operations department one evening, watching employees pack up their desks at reasonable hours and head home to their families. No one was working themselves to exhaustion. No one was sacrificing their health for deadlines. The culture had fundamentally changed. He stopped by Lucas's old desk, now occupied by a young engineer named Sarah who specialized in sustainable systems design. She looked up as Nathan approached. "Mr. Brooks, did you need something?" "No, just checking in. How are you finding the new protocols?" "Honestly, life-changing," Sarah smiled. "I used to work at a place where 60-hour weeks were standard. I was burning out hard. But here, my manager actually enforces the rest periods and encourages me to maintain boundaries. I'm doing better work because I'm not exhausted all the time." "That's exactly what we hoped would happen," Nathan said. "Keep up the great work, Sarah." As he walked back to his office, Nathan thought about Lucas, about the brilliant, generous man who'd volunteered for an overnight shift to protect his manager, who'd recognized Nathan's efforts to change things even as the system ground him down, who died because workplace culture valued deadlines more than human lives. Lucas would never know that his death had catalyzed this transformation, would never see the safe, sustainable workplace his company had become. But Nathan liked to think he'd approve of what they'd built in his name. That evening, Nathan picked up Emma from her friend's house and they drove home together, talking about her upcoming high school entrance exams and summer plans. "You seem happy, Dad," Emma observed as they pulled into the driveway. "I am happy, sweetheart." "Because of Claire?" "Because of a lot of things. The work we're doing at the company, spending more time with you, actually sleeping through the night without nightmares. Claire's part of it, but not all of it." "But she's a big part," Emma pressed. Nathan smiled. "Yeah, she's a big part." They'd been dating officially for 2 months now, taking things slowly but steadily, building something that felt solid and real. Claire had even started joining them for Sunday dinners occasionally, fitting into their small family with surprising ease. Inside the house, Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Dinner tomorrow? There's something I want to talk to you about." A year ago, that message would have sent Nathan into a panic spiral. Now he just smiled and typed back, "Your place or mine?" "Yours. I'll bring wine and that pasta you like." "Perfect. See you at 7. The next evening, Claire arrived with grocery bags full of ingredients and a bottle of red wine. They cooked together in Nathan's kitchen, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd spent months learning each other's rhythms and patterns. Emma joined them for dinner, regaling Claire with stories from school, while Nathan watched his daughter and his girlfriend interact with easy affection. It felt natural, right? Like pieces of his life finally fitting together after years of fragmentation. After Emma excused herself to do homework, Nathan and Claire cleaned up the kitchen together. "You said you wanted to talk about something?" Nathan prompted. Claire dried her hands on a dish towel, suddenly looking nervous in a way Nathan rarely saw. "I got a call from the board this afternoon. They want to make the safety and wellness initiatives permanent, fully funded, and institutionalized as core company policy." "Claire, that's amazing." "It is. It means everything we've built is protected, sustainable, not dependent on me being CEO or you being in operations. It's real." She paused. "But there's more. They're creating a new executive position, Chief Wellness Officer, to oversee the initiatives long-term, and they want to offer it to you." Nathan felt the floor shift beneath him. "Executive position? Claire, I'm an operations manager. I don't have—" "You have exactly what's needed. The expertise, the credibility with employees, the passion for the work, and a track record of results. You're the obvious choice, Nathan. The only choice, really." He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, trying to process this. An executive role would mean more money, more influence, more ability to shape company culture. It would also mean more visibility, more pressure, more responsibility. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Claire sat beside him, taking his hand. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you and Emma. This isn't about what the board wants or what I want. It's about what you want. What will make you happy and fulfilled without destroying the work-life balance you've fought so hard to establish." Nathan thought about the past 6 months, about the joy he'd found in implementing changes that actually protected people, about the satisfaction of seeing employees thrive under policies he'd helped design. He thought about Emma, about having the flexibility to be present for her high school years. He thought about Claire, about building a life with her that wasn't consumed by work, despite their shared professional passion. "I want to talk to Emma about it," he said finally. "This affects her too. If I take an executive role, there will be more demands on my time, more pressure. I need to make sure she's okay with that." "That's very you," Claire said with a smile. "Always considering how your decisions affect the people you love." "Is that a criticism?" "It's a compliment. It's one of the things I love about you." She paused, realizing what she'd just said. "I mean, you love about me?" Nathan's heart was suddenly racing. Claire blushed the first time Nathan had seen her truly flustered. "I might be falling in love with you. Is that too fast? Too intense? We've only been officially together for 2 months, and I know we said we'd take things slow." Nathan kissed her, cutting off the anxious rambling with the kind of certainty he felt in his bones. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he smiled. "I'm falling in love with you too. Have been since that first dinner at Marco's when you looked at me and saw Nathan instead of just the manager who approved the schedule that killed your brother." "We're a mess," Claire said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're healing," Nathan corrected. "Together." Later that evening, after Claire had gone home and Emma was getting ready for bed, Nathan knocked on her door. "Come in," she called. He found her sitting at her desk, surrounded by textbooks and notes, her laptop open to a study guide for her entrance exams. "Can we talk for a minute?" Nathan asked. "Always." Emma closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. Nathan explained the board's offer, the executive position, the increased responsibility, the recognition of the work he'd been doing. "That's incredible, Dad." Emma's face lit up. "You're going to take it, right?" "I wanted to talk to you first. An executive role means longer hours sometimes, more pressure, more visibility. I need to know you're okay with that before I make any decisions." Emma stood up and hugged him fiercely. "Dad, I'm not a little kid anymore. I don't need you home every night by 6. What I need is to see you doing work you're passionate about, building something meaningful, being happy. If this position does that for you, then absolutely take it." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Besides," Emma pulled back with a grin, "you'll have Claire to keep you balanced. She won't let you fall back into workaholic patterns." Nathan laughed. "You have a lot of faith in her." "I have faith in both of you. You're good for each other. You make each other better." The next morning, Nathan called the board chair and accepted the position. The announcement went out company-wide that afternoon. Nathan Brooks, the operations manager who'd spent 4 years fighting for employee safety, was being promoted to the newly created role of Chief Wellness Officer. The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in from employees at every level, thanking him for his advocacy and expressing excitement about the company's direction. Managers reached out asking for advice on implementing the protocols in their own departments. Even competitors started inquiring about the initiative, curious how it had produced such remarkable results. But the message that meant the most came from Lucas's mother. Claire had stayed in touch with her family over the years, and when she told them about Nathan's promotion and the company's transformation, Lucas's mother had asked for his contact information. The email was short but devastating in its kindness. "Dear Nathan, Claire told me about the wonderful work you've been doing to make the company safer. I want you to know that Lucas thought very highly of you. He told me more than once that you were a manager who genuinely cared about your team, who fought for them even when it was difficult. I'm so glad that fight has resulted in changes that will protect others the way we couldn't protect my son. Thank you for turning tragedy into purpose. I know Lucas would be proud. With gratitude, Margaret Whitfield." Nathan read the email 3 times, tears streaming down his face, before forwarding it to Claire with a simple message. We did it. We actually did it. Her response came immediately. No, you did it. You've been doing it for 4 years. I just gave you the authority to do it at scale. I'm so proud of you, Nathan. That evening, Nathan, Claire, and Emma went out to celebrate. They chose Marco's, the same restaurant where Nathan and Claire had their first dinner, and toasted to new beginnings, to healing, to the possibility of building something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. To Lucas, Claire said, raising her glass, who brought us together even in his absence. To Lucas, Nathan echoed, and to everyone we're protecting by doing this work. To Lucas, Emma added, and to my dad, who finally figured out that honoring the dead doesn't mean destroying yourself. They clinked glasses, 3 people bound by grief and love, and the courage to move forward while carrying the past. 2 years later, Nathan stood in the same conference room where he'd presented the safety initiative to the board. But today wasn't a board meeting, it was an anniversary celebration. The Lucas Whitfield Workplace Safety Initiative was now 3 years old, implemented across the entire company and being adopted by competitors across the industry. The results had exceeded even their most optimistic projections. Employee retention was at record highs. Innovation metrics had improved dramatically. The company had been named one of the best places to work in the country for 2 consecutive years. And most importantly, not a single employee had died from workplace-related fatigue or unsafe conditions since the policies were implemented. Nathan looked around the room at the faces gathered to celebrate, department heads, employees, board members, and in the front row, Emma and Claire sitting side by side. Emma was 15 now, confident and brilliant, already thinking about colleges and future careers. Claire wore an engagement ring on her left hand, a simple band Nathan had given her 6 months ago when he'd finally worked up the courage to ask her to marry him. She'd said yes immediately, laughing and crying and telling him she'd been waiting for him to ask for months. "Thank you all for being here," Nathan began, his voice steady and strong. 3 years ago, we gathered in this room to discuss a proposal that many people thought was too ambitious, too idealistic, too risky. We were asking this company to fundamentally change how it valued employees, to prioritize human well-being over short-term profits, to prove that you could be both profitable and ethical. He clicked to a slide showing Lucas's photograph alongside the impressive metrics the initiative had produced. We did this to honor Lucas Whitfield, a brilliant engineer who died because workplace culture valued deadlines more than human lives. But we also did it for every employee who's ever felt pressured to sacrifice their health for their job. Every parent who's missed important moments with their children because of impossible schedules. Every person who's wondered if their company actually valued them as a human being. Nathan paused, looking directly at Claire, who smiled at him with tears in her eyes. The answer is yes. You are valued. Your health matters. Your well-being matters. Your life outside of work matters. And this company is committed to proving that every single day through policies that protect you, support you, and help you thrive. The room erupted in applause. Nathan saw employees embracing, managers wiping their eyes, board members nodding with genuine pride. This was what transformation looked like. Not just changed policies, but changed hearts. After the formal presentation, people mingled and shared stories about how the initiative had affected their lives. A young engineer talked about being able to attend his daughter's dance recitals because managers actually enforced the 6 p.m. cutoff. A marketing manager shared how the mental health resources had helped her through a difficult divorce. An operations analyst thanked Nathan personally for creating a culture where admitting you were overwhelmed was seen as responsible rather than weak. Claire found Nathan in the crowd and pulled him aside. "You did beautifully up there," she said, kissing him softly. "We did beautifully. This was never just me. No, but you were the one willing to fight for it long before anyone else cared. You were fighting for Lucas before I even took this position, fighting because you gave a damn about people when it would have been easier not to." Claire took his hands. "Nathan, I know we've talked about Lucas a lot over the years, about the guilt, the grief, the what-ifs. But I want to say something I've never quite put into words." "What's that?" "I think Lucas would be genuinely happy for us, for what we've built together, both professionally and personally. I think he'd love that his death catalyzed this kind of change, that his memory is attached to something so positive and protective. And I think Her voice caught slightly. I think he'd be glad we found each other, that we helped each other heal. Nathan pulled her close, holding her in the crowded conference room with people celebrating all around them. I think you're right. I think he'd be happy that something good came from something so terrible. More than something good, Claire murmured. Everything good. The policies, the culture change, us, the family we're building, all of it. Emma appeared at their side, grinning. Are you two being disgustingly sweet in public again? Absolutely, Nathan said, pulling his daughter into the embrace. Get used to it. I am used to it. It's actually kind of nice. Emma squeezed them both. Dad, I'm proud of you, not just for the big executive stuff, but for actually letting yourself be happy, for choosing to live instead of just survive. Nathan looked at his daughter, almost grown now, wise beyond her years, the best thing he'd ever done with his life, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. She'd watched him nearly destroy himself with guilt and had loved him anyway, had pushed him toward healing even when he resisted, had welcomed Claire into their lives with generosity and grace. I love you, sweetheart, he said. Thank you for being patient with me while I figured things out. Love you too, Dad. Both of you, actually. Emma looked at Claire. You're good for him, and for me. I'm really glad you're going to be my stepmom. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I'm glad too, Emma. So glad. They stood together, a small family built from loss and healing, from courage and choice, from the willingness to believe that the future could be better than the past, and watched the celebration swirl around them. Nathan thought about the journey that had brought him here, the night Lucas died and the guilt that had consumed him, the years of fighting for change while drowning in self-blame, the Friday evening when Claire had finally cornered him and forced him to confront what he'd been running from, the board presentation where they'd fought for something bigger than either of them, the slow, careful building of a relationship with someone who understood his deepest wounds because she carried the same scars. All of it had led to this moment, standing in a room full of people celebrating a culture that valued their lives, holding the woman he loved while his daughter beamed at both of them, finally understanding that healing didn't mean forgetting and moving forward didn't mean leaving Lucas behind. It meant carrying the lessons learned from tragedy into a future built on purpose and love, and the fierce determination to make sure no one else had to die for a deadline. That night, after the celebration had ended and Emma was home doing homework, Nathan and Claire sat on his back porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I've been thinking, Claire said, her head resting on his shoulder, about the wedding. What about it? I want to include something in the ceremony, something that honors Lucas and your wife, something that acknowledges they're part of what brought us together, even though they're not here to see it. Nathan's throat tightened. What did you have in mind? Maybe a moment of silence or a candle lighting, or just something where we acknowledge that our love was built on the foundation of their lives and the lessons we learned from losing them. I want them to be present in spirit, recognized and honored. I love that idea, Nathan said quietly. They shaped who we became. It's right that they're part of our future together. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the night deepen around them. Nathan thought about all the versions of himself that had existed over the years, the desperate father trying to hold his world together after his wife's death, the guilt-ridden manager convinced he'd killed someone, the man running from his CEO because looking at her hurt too much, the executive building policies that would save lives, the person learning to love again after thinking he never would. All of those versions had been necessary to become who he was now, someone who understood that strength meant being vulnerable, that healing required facing pain, that honoring the dead meant living fully rather than dying slowly from guilt. Thank you, Nathan said suddenly. For what? For not giving up on me. For cornering me that Friday night instead of letting me keep running. For sharing your own grief so I didn't have to carry mine alone. For building this with me. The initiative, the relationship, the future, for everything. Claire lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. Thank you for being brave enough to stop running, for choosing healing over guilt, for loving me despite all the complicated ways we're connected, for being exactly who you are, someone who cares so deeply it nearly destroys him, but who channels that caring into making the world better. They kissed under the stars. Two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of shared tragedy and chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Two people who understood that the past didn't have to define the future, that grief could coexist with joy, that honoring loss meant living well rather than suffering endlessly. Nathan Brooks had spent 4 years running from his guilt, convinced that he deserved to suffer for failing to save Lucas Whitfield. But in facing that guilt, in letting Claire share the burden, in choosing purpose over punishment, he'd discovered something profound. The best way to honor the dead wasn't through endless atonement, but through protecting the living, through building safer workplaces where people could thrive without sacrificing their health, through creating a culture that valued human beings over productivity metrics, through showing his daughter that resilience meant facing pain rather than avoiding it, through allowing himself to love again, to be happy again, to believe he deserved the good things life offered. Lucas Whitfield's death had been a tragedy that couldn't be undone. But from that tragedy had grown something meaningful, policies that protected thousands of employees, a relationship built on understanding and healing, a family forged from loss and strengthened by love. Nathan had finally learned what Emma and Claire had been trying to teach him all along, that guilt was only useful if it changed behavior, that honoring the dead meant cherishing the living, and that the courage to face pain was also the courage to embrace joy. He was still a single father at heart, still careful, still carrying scars that would never fully fade. But he was no longer running. He had chosen to face the pain, and in doing so he'd built something better for his child, for others, and for himself. He had chosen healing. He had chosen love. He had chosen life. And that, Nathan finally understood, was the greatest honor he could give to those he'd lost.